What if the house you entered didn't just want your body, but your soul, your memories, your very name? This is the story of Lucas Bennett, a young medical student drawn into a job he thought would save his mother, only to discover a forest of living roots and a girl possessed by something older than nightmares. It's a journey through grief, terror, and cosmic rebirth, where every shadow whispers and every choice echoes forever. If you think you know haunted houses, think again. Are you ready to step inside? I still remember the first time I heard about the Aldridge family. It was a cold, mist-slicked morning in Ashpine, Maine, the kind of morning that clings to your skin and makes you question whether you're still dreaming. The whole town sat quietly under a blanket of fog, the pine trees stretching into the pale sky like clawed fingers. I was standing at the bus stop outside Pinecrest Medical Center, clutching a half-empty thermos of cheap coffee, still wearing my hospital scrubs under my jacket. My fingers trembled slightly, not just from the cold but from the lack of sleep that had become my constant companion. My name is Lucas Bennett, 26, medical student, son, broke. I'd been working night shifts at the hospital, handling patient records and shuttling between rooms to cover for overworked nurses. Anything to scrape together enough to pay the next chunk of my mother's medical bills. Stage 3 lymphoma. That phrase haunted me more than any ghost story Ashpine could ever spin. I thought I'd seen the worst a body could do to itself. The tumors, the gasping, the blood. But what I didn't understand back then was that real horror doesn't always come in lab results or x-rays. Sometimes it lives behind closed doors, hidden under polite smiles and whispered offers. A few weeks before that morning, I had received a foreclosure notice on my student apartment. I spent hours pacing in the cramped kitchen, scrolling through job postings, any quick gigs, anything. But jobs in Ashpine are as scarce as warm days in January. That's when I first saw the flyer. I almost missed it. It was pinned to the corkboard next to the cafeteria's broken vending machine. The paper was thick, almost velvety, with elegant calligraphy. Seeking responsible caretaker for one evening. Generous compensation. Inquire at 301 Hollow Creek Road. Hollow Creek Road. Everyone in town knew that place. The winding dirt path that curved deep into the forest, up the slope where the old stone house loomed like a leftover from another century. Locals called it the house on the hill, though most avoided even looking in that direction when driving past. Yes, they said it was cursed, that every so often it swallowed people whole. Wanderers, caretakers, naive kids looking for a thrill. Nobody really knew. But people in Ashpine are experts at keeping secrets, the same way the pines hide the sky. I tore the flyer down before my rational brain could intervene. By noon, my mother's coughing had returned, raw and unstoppable. I spent hours next to her hospital bed, wiping her forehead with a cold cloth, promising her that I'd find a way, that I'd figure it out, that she'd be okay. That night, as the wind howled and slammed the loose shingles against the roof, I stared at the flyer on my desk. My student loan statement sat beneath it like a ghost, the red final notice peeking out from under the fancy script. I convinced myself it was just a babysitting gig, just one night, easy money. Besides, how bad could it really be? When I called the number listed on the flyer, a woman answered after the first ring. Her voice was velvet, smooth, calm, yet carrying an undertone that scraped at something deep inside my chest. "Lucas Bennett," she said before I could introduce myself. "We've been expecting your call." I nearly dropped my phone. "Sorry, who is this?" I stammered, my fingers tightening around the receiver. "This is Mrs. Aldridge," she continued. "We've heard about you, your dedication to your studies, your mother's condition. You seem responsible. We believe you're exactly what we need." Her words slid into me like cold water. My throat closed, and for a moment I almost hung up. But then I thought of my mother, her pale skin, the tubes, the hospital smell that clung to me like a second skin. "What exactly do you need me to do?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Just look after our daughter, Alara, for one night," she said. "We will pay you generously, enough to cover several months of your bills." I didn't even realize I was nodding until I saw my reflection in the dark window, my head bobbing up and down like a puppet. "All right," I breathed. I remember walking to class the next morning, the trees creaking overhead, frost glinting like tiny knives on the asphalt. My mind churned through every warning story I'd ever heard. Old folks at the town diner talked about Hollow Creek Road as if it were a portal to another world. "That old house eats people alive," I heard them say between slurps of bitter coffee. "They see shadows in the windows, or worse, eyes." But for every ghost story, there was a part of me that craved the unknown. I was a scientist at heart, trained to rationalize, to peel back mystery with logic. That night, back in my room, I packed a small bag, a spare shirt, my stethoscope out of habit, a dog-eared copy of Grey's Anatomy I couldn't sleep without. I stood in the mirror, eyes hollow, jaw tight. "One night," I whispered to myself, "just one night." When the day arrived, Ashpine greeted me with the same mist that had swallowed the sun since early morning. The fog curled around the pines like an animal, moving in slow, heavy breaths. My old Toyota rattled as I turned onto Hollow Creek Road, gravel popping under the tires. At first, I saw nothing but dark tree trunks and pockets of milky mist. Then the house revealed itself, a monstrous silhouette of gray stone and black ironwork, windows tall and narrow like watchful eyes. I parked, killed the engine, and sat in silence for a moment, listening to my own pulse hammer in my ears. I checked my phone, no service, of course. Taking a deep breath, I stepped out. The cold bit at my cheeks. The air smelled of wet moss and something faintly metallic. My feet crunched on the frozen ground as I approached the towering front doors. I was about to knock when they swung open silently, revealing Mrs. Aldridge. She looked exactly as I'd pictured her voice, statuesque, pale, with hair so dark it seemed to drink the hallway light. Her eyes, they were the same amber honey hue that would haunt me for nights to come. "Lucas," she said softly. "Punctual, we appreciate that." She stepped aside and I entered, my breath snagging as I looked around. The interior felt like a museum and a mausoleum at once. Black marble floors, towering velvet drapes, paintings that seemed to shift when you weren't looking directly at them. The air was heavy with the scent of old wood and something sweeter, darker, like rotting flowers. "Laura is resting now," Mrs. Aldridge continued, guiding me deeper into the house. "You will meet her soon. Until then, I suggest you read these carefully." She handed me a thick ivory envelope, sealed with deep red wax stamped with a symbol that looked almost like a tree, or perhaps a creature with too many limbs. "We have rules here," she added, her voice a delicate blade. "Follow them precisely. It ensures everyone's safety." My fingers twitched as I held the envelope. Somewhere in the back of my mind, every instinct screamed to turn around and run. But I thought of my mother again, her gentle eyes, her pain. I nodded. "Good," Mrs. Aldridge said, and for a fleeting second her lips curled into a smile that did not reach her eyes. "We leave at dusk. We will return at dawn. You must not leave before then." She turned, her dark gown sweeping across the floor like a living shadow. As I watched her glide away, my stomach turned. The last rays of daylight flickered through the narrow windows, casting long fingers of darkness that crept up the walls. In that moment, standing alone in that hallway of shifting portraits and unnatural silence, I felt the first chill of something I would come to know too well. The sensation that my life, my real life, had already ended the moment I set foot on Hollow Creek Road. The hallway stretched on forever. Or maybe it only felt that way because of the way each step echoed off the marble floor, bouncing back at me like a mocking laugh. I clutched the envelope Mrs. Aldrich had given me, my thumb running over the wax seal, again and again. That symbol, like a twisted tree or a creature caught mid-transformation, burned itself into my brain. Somewhere deep in the house, I heard a faint ticking, like 100 clocks out of sync, but there were no clocks on the walls. Only paintings. Each portrait stared at me, their eyes glassy and accusing. A woman in a black lace veil, a young boy with a face too thin and eyes too large, a man in a military uniform that looked centuries old. Each canvas shimmered slightly, as if they'd been painted on thin water instead of oil. I took a deep breath, trying to steady the wild animal clawing at my ribs. I had come for one reason: money, from my mother. for her chemotherapy sessions. But in that instant, I knew. Money or not, something about this felt deeply, fundamentally wrong. I forced myself to move. A narrow hallway opened into a vast sitting room. A grand piano stood under a towering stained glass window. The window depicted something like a forest, but the trees bent in unnatural ways, spiraling toward a sun that looked more like an open eye than a star. On the piano sat a lone music box, its lid carved with the same eerie symbol from the wax seal. I didn't dare touch it. Instead, I turned to a set of plush, deep red chairs arranged in a semicircle around a massive stone fireplace. The hearth was empty, but soot streaked up the chimney like black claw. There, on a small table, I saw another envelope. This one was thinner, labeled in looping handwriting. Instructions for Lucas Bennett. I sat down, my legs heavy as cement. My hand trembled as I broke the wax and unfolded the first page. Welcome, Lucas. Tonight you will watch over our daughter, Alara. Follow each rule exactly. Do not question them. Do not improvise. Do not leave. My stomach flipped. Rule 1. Do not enter Alara's room before 11:00 p.m. She must rest undisturbed. If you hear her call before then, ignore it completely. Rule 2. At exactly 11:00 p.m., you will enter her room and begin her nightly routine. You must prepare her drink, the red vial in the refrigerator labeled Alara's night tonic. She must drink all of it. Rule 3. While she drinks, you must wind her music box precisely 3 times, no more, no less. Rule 4. Speak only in whispers around her. Loud sounds will agitate her. Rule 5. Do not uncover the mirrors in her room under any circumstances. Rule 6. If she asks to look out the window after dark, refuse gently but firmly. Rule 7. If she requests a bedtime story, only read from the book on her nightstand. Do I read from any other material even if she begs? Rule 8. During her second sleep cycle, if she appears distressed, stay at least 6 feet away from her bed. Do not touch her, no matter how she pleads. Rule 9. If you hear scratching inside the walls, recite the passage on the back of this page 3 times. Do not stop until the scratching ceases. Rule 10. If there is a power outage, use the black candle stored in the kitchen drawer marked emergency. Do not use flashlights or any battery-powered lights. Rule 11. Under no circumstances allow Alara to leave her room. The door must remain locked at all times, unless you are inside. The final line felt like it had been carved into my skull rather than written on paper. Failure to follow these rules will result in severe consequences for both you and Alara. I slammed the paper onto the table, gasping. My throat burned. I wanted to laugh, to scream, to run out into the woods and never look back. Instead, I forced my body to move. I stood, picked up the paper again, and flipped it over. On the back, in smaller handwriting, almost like a secret confession, was a single line. The roots grow deeper when watched. I didn't know what the hell it meant. I didn't want to know. I glanced at my phone. No bars, not even a single flicker of signal. The battery icon hovered at 23%, though it felt more like a death sentence than a warning. Somewhere in the house, a door creaked. I jumped, every muscle in my body seizing up like a fresh corpse. I turned slowly. A long carpeted staircase curved upward into darkness. At the top stood a figure, small and still. My eyes strained to make sense of it. A girl in a long white nightgown, her hair spilling down like a sheet of ink. Alara. She didn't move, but even from here I could feel her gaze on me, heavy and curious. The hallway light flickered above her, casting her face in broken, shifting shadow. I swallowed, my tongue like sandpaper. The paper had been clear. I wasn't supposed to see her yet. I forced my voice into a low whisper, though my lungs screamed for oxygen. Alara, go back to your room. I'll come see you at 11. She tilted her head slowly, like a marionette learning to move for the first time. Her hair parted just enough for me to glimpse her eyes, impossibly large, glimmering with a dull, honey-colored light that felt wrong. She said nothing. Instead, she turned and disappeared into the shadows, her bare feet silent on the stairs. I pressed my back against the wall, my heartbeat slamming so hard I could hear it echo in my skull. Minutes crawled by, or maybe it was hours. Time had no meaning in that house. Eventually, I dragged myself into the kitchen. Inside, the refrigerator hummed softly, the only normal sound in the entire place. I opened it, and there it was. A small glass vial filled with a thick, dark red liquid. The label read, Alara's Night Tonic, in the same elegant script. I touched the vial. It was cold, much colder than it should have been. A faint metallic scent wafted up as I unscrewed the cap. I gagged and forced myself to put it back. The kitchen drawer marked emergency practically glowed under the weak ceiling light. I opened it and found the black candles, thick and heavy, each one carved with symbols I didn't recognize. I imagined my mother's hospital bed, the IV drip, the soft wheeze of the oxygen machine. I imagined her eyes lighting up when she saw me walk into the room with good news. One night, I muttered to myself, just get through this one night. But deep inside, in a part of me that no medical textbook had ever described, I knew that house wasn't just a job. It wasn't just a caretaker gig. It was a trap. And I had just stepped into its mouth. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 7 times. Each low, reverberating note crawled up my spine like an insect, making my skin tighten. I sat in one of the deep red chairs by the fireplace, clutching the list of rules like it was a Bible during the apocalypse. My eyes scanned the words over and over, but none of it felt real. 8 times, I considered bolting for the door, sprinting out into the freezing fog, back down Hollow Creek Road. But every time, I saw my mother's face flash before my eyes. Her cheeks sunken, hair falling out in clumps. Her eyes soft but hollow. I could almost hear her voice. Lucas, you always overthink everything. Just breathe. God, what I wouldn't give to hear that for real again. The house felt alive. Shadows crept across the walls as the last hints of dusk surrendered to the heavy darkness outside. The paintings on the walls seemed to shift in my peripheral vision, their expressions subtly twisting. Some looked afraid, others looked hungry. My fingers trembled as I checked my watch. 7:42 p.m. Hours to go before I was allowed upstairs. Hours to sit and listen to the impossible noises coming from above. From time to time, I heard light footsteps, too soft to be an adult, too deliberate to be an animal. Then a soft, melodic humming floated down the stairs, drifting into the sitting room like smoke. It was a lullaby, but the melody felt off. The final notes always seemed to slip downward, almost like they were sinking into something deep and black. I stood up, pacing the room, trying to distract my mind. I passed the piano again, its keys catching the candlelight. A single sheet of music sat on the stand. I leaned in. The notes were scribbled frantically, almost violently. The title at the top read, The Roots Sing Beneath. I slammed the cover shut and turned away, my heart hammering in my throat. The minutes dragged by. I checked my phone again, no signal. Of course. I moved into the dining room, hoping for something, anything to break the suffocating silence. The long wooden table could easily seat 20 people, though tonight it was set for none. Tall black candles lined the center, their wicks unlit but wax-stained with odd red patterns. At the far end of the table sat a glass dome. Inside it, a single pale rose, its petals rimmed with black. I stepped closer and noticed each petal had thin hairline cracks, as if it had been turned to porcelain. A sharp sound snapped behind me. I spun, my whole body rigid. The lights flickered once, twice, then steadied. But in that moment, I saw something move in the reflection of the dining room window. A shape, impossibly thin, crawling along the ceiling behind me. I whirled around, but the ceiling was empty. My pulse thundered so hard I thought my ribs would crack open. I stumbled backward into the hallway, nearly dropping the paper. The portraits seemed to watch me even more intently now. The boy with a thin face appeared to be smiling, a crooked, knowing grin that hadn't been there before. I checked my watch again. 9:03 p.m. 2 more hours. I forced myself back into the sitting room and sat, hugging my knees to my chest. My mind replayed every lecture I'd ever heard about hallucinations under stress, sleep deprivation, hypoxia. I wanted to believe that's all this was. But then the humming started again. Louder this time, and with a second voice weaving through it. A harmony that felt wrong in my bones. I pressed my palms over my ears, rocking slightly. Just one night, I whispered to myself. One night, one night. I stared into the unlit fireplace, the soot stains forming strange patterns, twisting shapes that looked almost like letters or runes. I shook my head hard, my temples throbbing. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement on the stairwell. I forced myself to look. Alara stood at the top again, her white nightgown billowing slightly, though there was no breeze. Her hair fell forward, obscuring most of her face. She leaned against the banister, her small hand gripping it so tightly her knuckles turned bone white. My heart froze as she slowly raised her head. Her eyes glowed faintly, that same terrible amber, like honey left too long in a jar, turning dark and viscous. She opened her mouth as if to call out. My breath caught in my throat. The paper had been clear. Do not respond. Do not enter. But instead of words, a sound emerged. A dry, clicking, insect-like chittering that reverberated down the walls. I pressed further into the chair, my nails digging into the upholstery. "Lucas," she finally whispered, her voice stretched thin like a frayed string. "Come upstairs early tonight. I'm so lonely." The way she said my name, it felt like someone dragging an ice pick across the inside of my skull. My body started to move without me. One foot on the floor, then another. I stopped myself just in time, gasping. "No," I croaked out, my voice raw. "Not until 11. Alara tilted her head again, impossibly far to the side. Her lips curled upward into something too wide to be a human smile. She dropped to all fours and vanished into the darkness at the top of the stairs. I collapsed back into the chair, shaking uncontrollably. The ticking from somewhere deep inside the walls returned, louder now, almost like a heartbeat, but not mine. I scrambled for the paper, clutching it so tightly I nearly ripped it. My eyes darted across the lines again, desperately searching for reassurance, for any hidden promise that this would end if I just followed the damn rules. I checked my watch again, 10:11 p.m. 49 minutes to go, 49 eternities. The humming returned once more, this time joined by what sounded like faint scratching from inside the walls. I remembered the back of the page, the passage. My eyes flicked to it. Through roots and dark, silence abide. Retreat to depths where secrets hide. Beneath the moon and twisted pine, let sleep reclaim what once was mine. I closed my eyes and recited it, my lips trembling. The scratching grew more violent, the walls shuddering slightly as if something was trying to claw its way through. I repeated the verse again and again until the scratching slowly, mercifully faded. When I finally opened my eyes, I was soaked in sweat. My watch read 10:48 p.m. 12 minutes, just 12 more. I forced myself to stand, my legs weak as paper. I stepped toward the staircase, each movement feeling like wading through a nightmare. I clutched the vial of Alara's night tonic in one hand, the crumpled rule sheet in the other. Above me, the landing was dark and silent now, but even from here I could sense her waiting, feel her breath, hear that gentle, false humming echoing faintly down the hall. "All night," I whispered again, my voice cracking. Just one night. But deep down, something inside me knew. Whatever was waiting at the top of those stairs, whatever Alara truly was, this was only the beginning. The stairs creaked under my weight as I ascended, each step a scream in the suffocating silence. My knees wobbled, my breath came in ragged gasps. The rule sheet crinkled in my damp fist. I squeezed it so hard my knuckles turned bone white. As I reached the top landing, the hallway unfurled before me like a black river, lined with doors on either side. Only one door stood ajar, a soft glow leaking from within, pulsing like a heartbeat. Alara's room. I took a shaky step forward. The walls seemed to lean in closer with every movement, whispering secrets in a language my brain refused to understand. Outside, the wind howled through the pines, sounding almost like a chorus of wailing children. I reached her door and paused, my hand hovering over the knob. My heart banged so violently against my ribs I thought it might splinter them into shards. Slowly, I pushed the door open. Alara's room looked nothing like I expected. A delicate four-poster bed dominated the center, its curtains sheer and ivory, fluttering even though the windows were shut. The walls were painted a pale, almost sickly lavender, covered in patterns of twisting vines and roots. A small bookshelf stood in the corner, stacked with tattered storybooks. Beside it, a rocking chair sat eerily still. On the nightstand, the music box waited. Its surface gleamed softly in the low lamplight. The same twisted tree symbol was etched into its lid. And there, sitting cross-legged on the bed, was Alara. She wore the same white nightgown, her long black hair veiling most of her face. Her hands rested on her knees, fingers twitching as though strumming some invisible instrument. When I stepped inside, she stilled completely. Slowly, she lifted her head, revealing those terrible amber eyes. "Hello, Lucas," she whispered. Her voice crawled along the edges of my mind like a spider weaving a web. I tried to swallow, but my throat refused to obey. "Oh, hi, Alara," I finally managed, my voice barely recognizable. She tilted her head. "I'm thirsty tonight. Extra thirsty." I nearly dropped the vial. My fingers fumbled with the cap as I approached her. The air felt thicker with every inch, almost syrupy, as if I was moving through some unseen fog. I forced a shaky smile and handed her the vial. She grabbed it eagerly, her small hands surprisingly strong. As she drank, thick red liquid dripped down her chin and onto her gown, staining it like an abstract painting of a violent crime scene. "Delicious," she purred, licking her lips with a disturbingly long tongue. My stomach flipped. I snatched the music box off the nightstand, my fingers trembling so badly I nearly dropped it. 3 times, exactly 3 times. I turned the key once. The soft tinkling notes started to dance through the room. Twice. A draft swept through, making the curtains billow as if breathing. 3rd time. The song played fully now, a delicate spiraling melody that felt both sad and triumphant. Alara giggled. "You did it right. Most don't." I backed up a step, glancing at the list. "Speak only in whispers." I leaned forward, my voice cracking as I whispered, "Is there anything else you need before your story?" Alara shook her head. Slowly, she wiped a stray red drop from her chin and smeared it across her cheek. "I like you," she whispered. "Your soul is so soft." My legs threatened to give out. I reached for the book on her nightstand, an ancient leather-bound tome, the spine nearly falling apart. I flipped it open. The pages smelled of mold and something darker, like rotting meat. The text was in English, but the words seemed to slither on the page as I tried to focus. "Once upon a time," I began, my whisper trembling, "in a forest where the trees whispered secrets to the moon." Alara leaned forward, eyes wide with hunger, not for the story itself, but for something deeper, something I couldn't name. As I read, the words twisted in my mouth, each syllable cutting like glass. The shadows in the room grew thicker, clustering in the corners, crawling up the walls like vines reaching for sunlight. Every few sentences, Alara would twitch, her head jerking sharply to the side. Sometimes she would repeat fragments of my words under her breath in a voice that wasn't hers, deeper, ancient, arcing. Halfway through the story, she suddenly shrieked, arching her back. Her mouth opened wide, far too wide, revealing rows of small, needle-like teeth that extended impossibly deep into her throat. I choked on my words, nearly dropping the book. Alara convulsed once, then snapped forward, her head lolling to the side. She giggled, low and guttural. "Almost bedtime," she whispered. I forced myself to continue reading. My eyes watered, the letters swimming on the page. I glanced at the rule sheet. If she becomes distressed, stay at least 6 feet away. Do not touch her. I dropped the book on the bed and stumbled backward until my spine pressed against the cold wall. Alara crawled across the bed, her movement spider-like and jerky. She pressed her face close to the covers, inhaling deeply. "They're close tonight," she crooned, her voice layered with multiple tones. "So hungry." I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to block out the sight. The room grew colder, my breath now a thin fog in the air. The shadows at the edges of the room pulsed as though they were alive, breathing. Suddenly, the music box began to play again on its own. The lid snapped open, and the melody twisted, turning sour and discordant, as if the notes were bleeding together. Alara let out a high-pitched laugh, her head whipping toward me so fast I heard a sickening crack. "Don't worry," she rasped. "They won't take you yet." Before I could move, she lunged toward the music box, snapping it shut with a sharp clap. The room fell into an almost painful silence. Her body slumped forward, her arms dangling limply at her sides. Her breathing slowed, and after a moment she began to sway gently, like a doll on a broken carousel. I stood frozen, my legs numb, heart threatening to explode. She tilted her head once more, slowly, impossibly far. "Good night, Lucas," she murmured, her voice suddenly small and sweet, as if nothing had happened. Then she fell sideways onto the bed, curling up like a child, her hair fanned out, her pale face almost peaceful now. I edged toward the door, never taking my eyes off her. My fingers closed around the knob, slick with sweat. I slipped out, pulling the door shut behind me with the softest click I could manage. In the hallway, I collapsed against the wall, gasping for breath. My hands shook so violently I dropped the list. The paper drifted to the floor like a dead leaf. I stared at it, my eyes blurring with tears. Somewhere deep in the house, the faint scratching resumed. I recited the passage on the back, my voice a broken whisper. "Through roots and dark, silence abide, retreat to depths where secrets hide." The words stuck to my tongue like ash. When the scratching finally stopped, I slid to the floor, pressing my forehead to my knees. I was alive, for now, but I knew with every inch of my trembling body that I was only at the very edge of something much darker. I don't know how long I sat there in that hallway, knees pulled to my chest, breath rattling in and out like a dying engine. Time had dissolved into something meaningless, like a thread fraying in water. The scratching had stopped, but the echoes lived inside my skull. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Lara's smile, that too wide, too sharp grin. Her voice like broken glass dragged across a chalkboard. I wanted to believe I could just walk out, run into the forest, vanish into the mist, let the cold nights swallow me whole. But the rules still pulsed in my mind like a low-grade fever. "You must not leave before dawn." The phrase looped in my head, each repetition tighter, heavier, as though it was wrapping me in invisible chains. Eventually, I pushed myself upright, my spine screaming in protest. My hands still shook so badly I had to brace against the wall to keep from collapsing again. I stumbled downstairs, my feet heavy and numb. The living room was exactly as I had left it, though somehow it felt even colder now, as if the house itself had taken a long, shuddering breath in my absence. I lowered myself into one of the red velvet chairs near the fireplace. The empty hearth yawned back at me like an open mouth. I wished I could light it, anything to make this place feel less like a tomb, but I didn't dare. There were no rules about the fireplace, and somehow that terrified me more than if there had been. My watch read 12:27 a.m. Still hours until dawn. Outside, the wind picked up, howling against the high, narrow windows like an animal begging to be let in. I tried to focus on the moon, but it was hidden behind roiling, dark clouds. Then it started again. A soft, rhythmic scratching, this time from inside the walls just behind my head. Slow at first, almost hesitant, like fingernails testing a coffin lid. I shot to my feet so fast, I nearly toppled over. My eyes darted to the crumpled rule sheet on the floor by my chair. I lunged for it, snatching it up with trembling hands. Through roots and dark, silence abide, retreat to depths where secrets hide. Beneath the moon and twisted pine, let sleep reclaim what once was mine. I began to recite, my voice a hoarse whisper. The scratching intensified, accelerating into a frantic, wet scramble. It sounded like something was dragging its entire body across the inside of the walls, writhing and clawing as if desperate to escape, or to get in. I forced myself to keep going. Through roots and dark, silence abide. I felt the walls vibrate beneath my palm. A sudden sharp thunk made me stagger back, heart crashing against my ribs. On the far side of the room, a portrait fell off the wall and crashed onto the floor. The canvas split down the middle, revealing nothing behind it but rotting wood and a thin, black fungus that seemed to pulse in the candlelight. My mouth went dry. The scratching shifted locations, crawling around the room like a circling shark, retreat to depths where secrets hide. My voice wavered, but I pushed forward, spitting the words out as though they were poison. Suddenly the scratching stopped. The silence dropped so abruptly it felt like the world had been muted. I stood there, sweat dripping down my spine, my head swimming with nausea. From somewhere upstairs I heard a soft creak. Alara's door. I knew I wasn't supposed to go back up. The rules had been explicit, but every part of me wanted to check, to make sure she was still in her room, to reassure myself she hadn't slipped into the darkness like a phantom. I took a step toward the stairs, then stopped dead. A shape stood in the archway between the living room and the hallway, a tall, thin silhouette, unnaturally still. It didn't look human. Its proportions were all wrong, the arms too long, the legs bent at angles that defied anatomy. As I squinted, a sound rose from its direction. A low, wet gurgle, like someone drowning in a shallow pond. I stumbled backward, my foot catching on the edge of the rug. I fell hard onto my back, stars exploding across my vision. When I blinked again, the shape was gone. The doorway stood empty, save for a faint trail of something dark and viscous smeared across the floor. I forced myself to crawl to my feet, my lungs burned. I wanted to scream, to tear at my hair, to smash every mirror and window in that cursed house. Instead, I moved toward the kitchen. The rules said nothing about the kitchen. It felt like the only safe place left. I flipped on the dim overhead light. The kitchen looked almost normal, with its polished counters and expensive stainless steel appliances. But in the quiet, every drip from the faucet felt like a hammer strike. I opened the fridge, desperate for water or anything to ground me. My hand brushed against something cold and glassy, another vial, nearly identical to the one I had given Alara. I snatched it out and squinted at the label, "For later." My stomach twisted. I slammed the fridge shut and backed away. Then I heard it again. That chittering click from Alara's throat, only now it echoed from everywhere at once, as though the walls themselves had grown vocal cords. I pressed my back to the counter, clutching the edge until my fingers ached. A faint shuffle echoed down the hallway. Slowly, a soft melody floated toward me. The music box. It had started playing on its own again, the sweet, warped notes winding through the air like toxic perfume. I had to get back to the living room, back to the list, back to the single thing that felt like a lifeline. I bolted, my footsteps pounding against the hardwood. When I reached the room, I nearly collapsed with relief. The list was still there, lying in a pool of pale moonlight on the floor. I scooped it up, hugging it to my chest like a child with a security blanket. But then I saw the rug shift. It bulged slightly, as though something beneath it was trying to push up, to crawl out. My throat closed. The music box crescendoed into a final discordant screech, then fell silent. Slowly, the bulge beneath the rug subsided, melting back into the floorboards. I dropped to my knees, shivering uncontrollably. I don't know how long I stayed like that. Minutes, hours, lifetimes. All I know is when I finally glanced at my watch again, it read 2:41 in the morning, almost halfway to dawn. I pressed my forehead to the cool floor, the paper crumpled tight in my fist. I didn't know if I would survive until sunrise. I didn't know if I even wanted to. When I finally lifted my head from the cold floor, my neck cracked like dry branches underfoot. My eyes stung. My mouth tasted like iron. I blinked at my watch. 2:41 a.m. Time hadn't moved at all since I last checked. Or maybe it had, and the house simply refused to let me notice. I forced myself upright. My knees wobbled, threatening to buckle beneath me. My sweaty hand clung to the crumpled rule sheet, now torn at one corner and stained with something I didn't want to name. The living room felt different now, thicker, as if the air had been replaced with honey and ash. Every candle flickered in some invisible draft, shadows twisting like tortured dancers across the walls. Somewhere above me, Alara giggled, a low echoing giggle that slithered down the stairs and wrapped around my spine. I scanned the list again, squinting in the weak candlelight. My eyes fell to the bottom line I had always tried to ignore. Final rule: if the ritual is compromised, recite the fail-safe incantation and confine yourself immediately to the iron cellar beneath the kitchen. The iron cellar. The phrase made my stomach clench. I didn't want to go anywhere deeper into this house, least of all some dark cellar. But as the wind outside began to shriek like 1,000 voices screaming at once, I knew I had no choice. I stumbled toward the kitchen, clutching the list like a talisman. When I entered, the refrigerator door hung ajar, its interior light stuttering. The second vial, the one marked for later, sat alone on the top shelf, the only thing inside now. I slammed the door shut. My gaze fell to the far corner. There, hidden behind a dusty sack of potatoes and a rack of unused pans, was a small square iron door bolted into the floor. I dropped to my knees and ran my fingers over it. The metal felt shockingly cold, so cold my skin seemed to stick to it. Strange, branching sigils were etched into its surface, almost like veins under translucent skin. My pulse thudded against my ribs as I unlatched it. A low groan echoed out from the dark hole beneath, a sound that didn't belong in any normal house, more like the exhalation of some ancient, hungry animal. A rancid draft hit my face, carrying the smell of wet earth, old iron, and something sweetly rotten like spoiled fruit. I gagged, pulling my shirt over my nose. I heard footsteps then, soft, deliberate, coming from the hallway behind me. I turned sharply. Alara stood there, her tiny frame almost hidden in the dark archway, her head tilted impossibly far to one side, her hair hanging forward like a funeral veil. Her nightgown, once white, was now streaked in deep crimson, as though she had crawled through a river of blood. Her hands twitched at her sides, fingers curling and uncurling as if plucking invisible strings. "Lucas," she whispered, her voice carrying 1,000 echoes. "Don't go down there. Stay with me. Play with me." I staggered back, shaking my head so violently I nearly toppled. She took one step forward, her bare foot slapping wetly on the tile. Then another. Her face slowly rose into the dim kitchen light. Her mouth hung open too wide, stretching past where her jaw should have ended, revealing that endless pit of tiny, needle-thin teeth. "Stay!" she shrieked, her voice erupting into a guttural, inhuman roar that rattled the plates on the counter. My body acted on pure terror. I dove into the iron cellar opening, yanking the hatch shut above me just as she lunged. The clang of her body slamming against the metal vibrated down into the darkness, a bone-deep shockwave that left my ears ringing. I scrambled down the narrow, rusted ladder, nearly losing my grip as I slipped on something slicked. The cellar was a claustrophobic nightmare. The walls were lined with patches of black mold that seemed to move in the flickering light of the single candle I had managed to grab. The air was so heavy I could taste it on my tongue, bitter, fungal, and sharp. On the dirt floor, strange circles were etched into the ground, filled with symbols that seemed to pulse softly, like tiny, unseen heartbeats. My feet landed with a squelch. I pressed my back against the far wall, chest heaving, my sweaty fingers clenched around the candle stub. Above me, the iron hatch buckled and rattled. I heard her crawling, scraping her nails against the metal, each drag sending a bolt of nausea through my gut. "Lucas," she sang, drawing out every syllable in a mockery of a lullaby. "You can't hide from us." She giggled, a sharp serrated sound that cut through the walls. Then she went quiet. The silence that followed was far worse than the noise. I strained to hear anything, but the world above had dissolved into an eerie, impenetrable void. Then, from the dark, far corner of the cellar, I heard something shift. A low, wet, dragging sound. My candle flickered violently. Shadows stretched across the dirt, converging at the edges of the symbols carved into the floor. A shape began to emerge, something slithering, its movements impossibly smooth yet disjointed, as if it operated by an entirely different set of rules than my body understood. The smell intensified, rot and sulfur and something like scorched hair. I pressed further into the wall, tears sliding down my cheeks. My mind felt like it was tearing in half, trying to comprehend what was oozing toward me. 2 pinpricks of amber light bloomed in the darkness. Eyes, or what passed for them. "Lucas," it whispered, mimicking Alara's voice almost perfectly, but deeper, as though filtered through layers of wet earth and broken bones. I squeezed my eyes shut. My lips moved automatically, fumbling over the fail-safe incantation from the list. "Through roots and dark, silence abide. Retreat to depths where secrets hide." The creature paused, its heavy breathing echoing through the cellar like a grotesque symphony. When I dared to open my eyes again, the amber lights were closer. I fell forward, crawling across the cold dirt, chanting desperately, my voice cracking into sharp, panicked sobs. "Through roots and dark, silence abide. Retreat to depths where secrets hide." The lights trembled. The thing let out a screech so sharp it felt like needles in my eardrums. Then, like a film reel burning up, it flickered once, twice, and disappeared, leaving only a stinging silence in its wake. I collapsed onto the dirt floor, my face pressed into the rough ground, shaking so hard I thought my bones might shatter. Above, the iron hatch finally stopped rattling. The air seemed to still, as if the entire house had inhaled and was waiting to exhale. I stayed there, every nerve screaming, too afraid to move. I didn't know what would happen next. All I knew was that the sun still hadn't risen, and I wasn't sure I would live long enough to see it. I don't know how long I lay there, face down in the cold dirt of that iron cellar. The dampness seeped into my clothes, my skin, my bones. My teeth chattered so hard I thought they might crack. At some point, the candle sputtered and died, plunging me into a blackness so thick it felt alive. I couldn't tell if my eyes were open or closed. I focused on my breath. In, out, in, out. Each inhale tasted of earth and mold. Each exhale felt like giving away another piece of my sanity. Above me, the house had gone eerily silent. The scratching, the scraping, Alara's unearthly lullabies, all of it had stopped. But that quiet wasn't comforting. It felt like the hush before a predator pounces. I didn't want to move, but something inside me, some last ember of survival instinct, forced me upright. My muscles screamed as I pushed myself to my hands and knees, then staggered up against the cellar wall. I strained my ears. The only sound was the slow drip of water somewhere deeper in the cellar. Or maybe it wasn't water. In this place, I could no longer trust even the simplest sensations. My fingers brushed against the crumpled rule sheet, still clenched in my pocket. It felt like a paper-thin shield against a tsunami. A low groan echoed from the ladder above me. I looked up, my eyes adjusting just enough to make out the faint outline of the iron hatch. Then, movement. I froze. My lungs locked. Fingers, small, delicate, curled around the edge of the hatch from above. Alara's face slowly appeared, peering down. But this wasn't the girl I had first met. Her features had stretched, warped. Her eyes glowed brighter, flickering with that awful amber light. Her mouth hung slightly open, revealing a thin string of black saliva dripping onto the ladder below. She watched me silently for a moment, her head twitching in small, jerky motions. Then she spoke, her voice somehow both childish and ancient. "Lucas, it's time for my second sleep cycle." My stomach heaved. The list had warned me. If she appears distressed during her second sleep cycle, stay at least 6 feet away. Do not touch her. She began to descend the ladder, each movement slow and deliberate, like a spider lowering itself on an invisible thread. Her nightgown dragged behind her, stained and shredded, leaving dark streaks on the metal rungs. I pressed myself against the farthest wall, bile rising in my throat. My mind screamed at me to run, to claw my way through the dirt if I had to, but my body refused to obey. She reached the cellar floor and stood motionless, head down. Then, with a sudden snap, her head jerked up to face me. Her eyes rolled back until only milky whites showed, and her mouth gaped impossibly wide. She let out a sound, a raw, guttural wail that seemed to come from everywhere at once, vibrating through the walls, the dirt, my bones. I clamped my hands over my ears, but it didn't matter. The sound was inside me now, a shriek echoing in the deepest folds of my mind. Alara began to shuffle toward me, her arms dangling unnaturally long, fingers twitching. She stumbled and fell to her knees, then crawled forward, leaving deep gouges in the dirt. "Lucas, help me," she croaked, her voice splintering into overlapping tones. Some sounded human, others like feral animals, or something much older. I tried to force words from my throat. Nothing came. She lunged forward suddenly, her face stopping inches from mine. Her breath hit me like a furnace blast, thick with rotten copper. "Touch me," she whispered. "Please. Hold me." I shook my head violently, tears blurring my vision. Her eyes flickered and she leaned closer. "Touch me," she shrieked, her voice so loud the walls seemed to buckle. I fell sideways, scrambling backward on all fours until I slammed into the cellar's far corner. My shoulder throbbed from the impact. Alara let out a guttural hiss, her jaw snapping open and closed like a broken marionette. She clawed at her own face, tearing at her skin. Black veins bulged beneath the surface, pulsing like worms. From her wounds, a dark viscous liquid oozed, sizzling when it hit the dirt floor. The air filled with the stench of burning hair and spoiled milk. I gagged, covering my nose and mouth with my sleeve. Then she went still again. Her head tilted to the side, and she began to hum softly, that same twisted lullaby I had heard upstairs. Slowly, she crawled back toward the ladder, her movements jerky, mechanical. At the base of the ladder, she stopped and looked over her shoulder at me. Her eyes had returned, focused and cold. "Thank you for following the rules so far," she said, her voice returning to that innocent, sweet tone. A child's voice trying on kindness like an ill-fitting dress. She began to climb back up, each step echoing in my skull like the toll of a funeral bell. When she finally vanished beyond the hatch, I collapsed onto my side, sobbing. My fingers dug into the dirt so hard they came up raw and bleeding. I lay there, listening to the faint scraping of her nails on the metal above, her lullaby drifting away into the halls of the house. I didn't know what hour it was anymore. My watch had stopped at 2:41 a.m., its cracked face frozen in place like a broken eye. My thoughts spiraled. I tried to remember my mother's voice, her soft laugh, the way she used to hum while making tea. But Alara's melody had begun to drown those memories, twisting them into something dark and unrecognizable. A distant creak snapped me from my haze. I looked up. The hatch was slightly ajar, as if inviting me to come back upstairs. For a long moment, I simply stared. Then, against every instinct screaming inside me, I forced myself to crawl toward it. My limbs felt like they belonged to someone else, heavy and slow, as though the air itself had thickened into syrup. I reached the ladder, hesitated, and then climbed. At the top, I pushed the hatch open and emerged into the kitchen. The room felt colder than the cellar, impossibly so. My breath billowed in thick clouds. The kitchen lights flickered erratically. The black candles on the counter had all melted into twisted stumps, wax spilling over the edges like frozen screams. I turned toward the hallway and froze. Alara stood there, her back to me. Her hair hung in long, wet strands, and her head bobbed slightly as if she were listening to something I couldn't hear. Then she began to speak, her voice low and rhythmic, as though chanting to something only she could see. I pressed my hand to the wall to steady myself. This was the second cycle. The rules had warned me. But I realized then that the list had never told me how many cycles there would be. And as I watched her sway, the final, horrifying truth struck me like a blade. The night wasn't nearly over. My feet felt welded to the kitchen floor. Alara stood in the hallway, back turned, her silhouette a smudged stain against the trembling candlelight. Her head tilted to one side, her wet hair sliding across her narrow shoulders like a veil of black ink. I didn't dare breathe. Each inhale felt like pulling glass shards into my lungs. She began to hum again, that same lullaby, sweet in rhythm, but bent and twisted at the edges like a nursery rhyme sung in reverse. It wormed into my skull, echoing in places I didn't know sounds could reach. Then, slowly, she started to move. Her bare feet glided across the wooden floor, toes dragging lightly as if she was floating an inch above the surface. With each step, she whispered in that layered voice, 1,000 voices trying to speak at once, fighting for control. Lucas, 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 Lucas. My name fractured in her mouth, each syllable stretched and broken, a sound that didn't belong in this world. She reached the base of the grand staircase and stopped, her spine arched backward at an impossible angle, her arms dangling behind her like marionette strings. A wet, tearing noise erupted from somewhere deep in her chest, and she began to convulse violently, her shoulders shuddering, head snapping side to side. I pressed a trembling hand to my mouth to stifle a scream. My stomach clenched so hard I thought I might vomit. Suddenly, her head jerked upright, facing the ceiling. Her mouth fell open, wider and wider until it split the skin at the corners. Black veins spreading across her cheeks like lightning scars. From deep inside that maw, I heard them, whispers, dozens of tiny overlapping voices that hissed and giggled and wept all at once. They poured out of her, swirling into the hall like smoke. Thin tendrils of shadows slithered along the floor, climbing the walls, tracing the door frames with black, sticky trails. A portrait fell from the hallway wall and shattered on the floor. In the glass shards, I saw fleeting reflections, faces, distorted and blurred, screaming silently. Alara's head snapped forward suddenly. She stared straight at me, her eyes wide and glowing, two orbs of molten amber set in a skull too small to hold them. "Join us," she croaked. Her voice sounded like a church bell submerged in mud. "Be with us, forever." I stumbled backward into the kitchen counter, knocking over a row of empty glass jars. They shattered around my feet, slicing into my ankles and spraying droplets of red across the tile. She began to crawl toward me, her limbs moving with inhuman speed. The floorboards buckled beneath her weight, each slap of her hands echoing like gunshots. I turned and sprinted out of the kitchen. My blood left a trail as I bolted through the dining room. The chairs were no longer in neat rows. They had been toppled and rearranged into a grotesque spiral pattern. The pale rose under the glass dome had turned entirely black, its petals dripping a thick, tar-like liquid onto the tablecloth. The music box melody started again somewhere behind me, its notes sour and warped, twisting upward into an ear-splitting crescendo. I burst into the main hall and staggered toward the front door. My fingers fumbled at the lock, slippery with blood and sweat. I yanked, twisted, slammed my shoulder into the wood. Nothing. It wouldn't budge. Behind me, the floorboards creaked. I didn't have to turn around to know she was there. "Lucas," she sang, her voice 1,000 fragmented echoes, converging into a single haunting note. "The door won't help you. You belong to the house now." I slammed my forehead against the door, my breath coming in wild, ragged gasps. Tears streamed down my cheeks, mingling with the blood trickling from the cuts on my legs. I spun around at last, pressing my back to the door. Alara stood at the base of the stairs again. Her body twitched and shivered, her joints bending at grotesque angles. Shadowy tendrils snaked from her fingertips, spreading across the floor toward me like ink dropped in water. She took a single step forward, then another. I scanned the room, my mind clawing for any rule, any scrap of safety. My eyes darted to the rule sheet clutched in my shaking hand. Under no circumstances allow Alara to leave her room. The words hit me like a slap. I realized with a sinking horror that I had already failed. She was out. She was here. Suddenly she lunged, her arms stretched toward me, fingers splayed wide, her nails gleaming like obsidian knives. I ducked sideways at the last second. Her hand slammed into the door, leaving deep gouges in the wood. She shrieked, her voice ripping through my skull like a serrated blade. I sprinted toward the dining room again, my feet slipping in my own blood. I dove behind the long table, knocking over a candelabra that exploded into sparks as it hit the floor. She followed, crawling across the ceiling now, her limbs clicking and stretching like insect legs. Her face rotated fully upside down, her glowing eyes locked on me. From under the table, I saw the black rose on the dining table pulse. Once, twice, then explode, splattering tar-like petals in every direction. A thick, cloying stench filled the air. My head spun, my vision blurred. Alara dropped to the floor in front of the table. She bent down, peering under, her face impossibly close. "Lucas," she whispered, her voice low and melodic, as though coaxing a kitten from under a bed. "Don't be afraid. We can be a family now." I scrambled out the other side, tearing a deep gash in my palm on a broken shard of glass. I bolted for the hallway, then down a narrow side corridor I hadn't noticed before. The wallpaper here was torn and moldy, the floor sagging dangerously. At the end, a door stood ajar. Faint moonlight spilled through. I lunged inside and slammed it shut, throwing my body against it. My chest heaved, each breath ragged and acidic. The room was small, an old study. A massive oak desk sat against the far wall, papers scattered across it like abandoned confessions. Tall bookshelves loomed over me, their spines cracked and mold-eaten. On the far side, a narrow window overlooked the moonlit forest. The glass was warped and dirty, but it was real, the first real thing I'd seen all night. I staggered to it and pressed my forehead against the pane. The cold seeped into my skin, a cruel, bittersweet relief. Behind me, I heard the slow, rhythmic tapping of Alara's fingernails on the door. Tap, tap, tap. "Lucas," she sang again, softer this time, almost tender. "You're so close now. Don't ruin it." I shut my eyes, my mind a cyclone of screams. The forest looked so peaceful beyond the window, but I knew, deep in my marrow, that nothing outside could save me. Not anymore. I pressed my forehead harder against the window pane, my ragged breath fogging up the cracked glass. For a fleeting second, I imagined smashing through it and tumbling into the moonlit forest below. Branches tearing my skin, the icy air burning my lungs. Anything but staying here. But deep inside I knew, even if I jumped, even if I made it to the tree line, the house would find me. The house wasn't just a place. It was a living, breathing entity that had latched onto me like a parasite. Behind me, Alara's nails dragged softly along the door. Tap, tap, tap. A gentle, patient rhythm. "Lucas," she cooed, her voice now syrupy sweet. "I know you're tired. Let me in. We can finish this together." I staggered back from the window, my legs trembling. My eyes darted across the study, scanning for anything, a weapon, another exit, something to ground me. My gaze fell on the portraits lining the walls. I hadn't noticed them when I first stumbled in. They watched me with eyes too sharp, too alive. Their expressions twisted subtly as I moved, their mouths curling into faint, knowing smirks. A woman in a black lace veil, a young boy with hollow cheeks, an elderly man whose eyes were two bottomless pits. Each canvas seemed to breathe with the same subtle cadence as the house. I turned away, pressing my palms to my temples. My thoughts felt like a hornet's nest, buzzing and stinging from all sides. Suddenly, a low murmur filled the room, not from the hallway, but from the portraits themselves. "Lucas," the woman in the veil sighed, her voice like dry leaves rustling in the wind. "You should not have come. the boy hissed, his lips twitching into a cruel grin. The old man chuckled, a sound like grinding stones. You've broken the rules, you've let her out. I stumbled backward, crashing into the desk. Papers flew into the air like a flock of frightened birds. Stop! I screamed, pressing my back against the cold wood. Shut up! Shut up! Their voices only grew louder, overlapping into a shrill chorus that clawed at my sanity. You are the seed now, the woman whispered. You will grow her roots, the boy giggled, his eyes rolling in their sockets. The old man leaned forward in his frame, his face inches from the canvas edge. The house is hungry, and you, dear boy, are the banquet. A choked sob ripped from my throat. I grabbed a heavy paperweight from the desk, a brass orb shaped like a twisted knot, and hurled it at the old man's portrait. The canvas ripped with a sound like tearing flesh. Behind it, instead of wood or plaster, I saw a writhing mass of black tendrils, each ending in tiny groping fingers. They writhed toward the hole, reaching out, hungry. I turned and sprinted toward the door, but before I could touch the knob, it swung open. Alara stood there, smiling. Her eyes glowed with that horrific amber light, her hair clinging to her face like seaweed. Her hands were now grotesquely elongated, each finger ending in a curved, talon-like claw. Lucas, she sang, stepping forward. Look what you did. The portraits are awake now. The house is so excited. I backed away, slipping on scattered papers. My ankle twisted painfully as I crashed to the floor. She crawled toward me on all fours, her head swaying side to side like a predator sizing up its prey. You were supposed to keep me in my room, she whispered. You were supposed to protect me from them, but you failed. Her mouth widened into that impossible split grin, black veins branching down her neck. Behind her, the portraits began to chant in unison, their voices merging into a grotesque hymn. Roots below, stars above, flesh to earth, mind to love. Alara stopped inches from my face, her cold breath washing over me like a wave of decay. Her eyes softened for a moment, her voice dropping to a fragile, childlike whimper. Help me, Lucas, she pleaded, her claws retracting slightly. Please, I don't want to be like this. For a moment, I saw her, the scared little girl, her small hands trembling. My heart lurched. I reached a shaking hand toward her. Then her eyes snapped wide, and that smile returned, sharper than ever. She lunged forward, her claws slicing across my chest. Pain exploded through me, hot and electric. I screamed, rolling away, clutching at the deep gashes now oozing crimson through my shredded shirt. Alara howled with laughter, her voice shifting between high-pitched giggles and a deep, resonant growl. I crawled toward the corner of the room, my hands smacking into something heavy, a broken piece of the brass paperweight. With all the strength I had left, I swung it at her face. She shrieked, falling back, dark ichor spurting from the side of her jaw. Her head snapped to the side, bones cracking like splintering wood. I staggered to my feet, blood streaming down my chest and leg. I limped toward the door, every nerve in my body screaming. As I reached the hallway, I dared a glance back. Alara writhed on the floor, her limbs twisting and tangling, her mouth stretching into a spiral of teeth and darkness. Black tendrils sprouted from her spine, whipping and slapping against the floor. The portraits on the walls began to peel themselves from their frames, stretching outward, their features warping and melting. Their voices merged into a deafening roar, roots below, stars above. I stumbled forward, crashing into the hall wall. I braced myself, blood dripping from my fingertips, my breath coming in sharp, wheezing gasps. I knew there was no escape. The house wouldn't let me go, but something primal inside me refused to die cowering on that floor. I clutched the rule sheet to my chest, the last worthless shred of sanity I had, and forced myself to move. Behind me, Alara's roar grew deeper, vibrating the walls, shaking dust from the ceiling. The house felt like it was inhaling, readying itself to consume me whole. I knew I had minutes, maybe seconds, but as I limped down that hallway, filling the warmth of my blood slick beneath my fingers. One final thought screamed louder than the rest. I had to try. I staggered forward, my hand pressed to the gashes in my chest. Warm blood oozed through my fingers, the sticky warmth a cruel reminder that I was still alive. The hallway ahead seemed to stretch endlessly, warping and twisting, as if the walls themselves were breathing. Paintings writhed within their frames, their eyes following me, mouths twisting into grotesque parodies of smiles. Behind me, Alara's shrieks rose to a fever pitch, a wailing chorus of every voice I had ever known, all of them echoing inside my skull. Lucas, Lucas, Lucas. The walls trembled. Chunks of plaster crumbled to the floor. Something deep beneath the house groaned, like a massive creature shifting in its sleep. I forced myself to keep moving, my vision swimming in and out of focus. My head felt light, as if my skull might float away and leave my body behind. I turned a corner and nearly collapsed. A staircase spiraled downward before me, the steps slick and dark, carved from old stone. A sickly, pulsing light glowed faintly from below, like the last ember of a dying star. I knew it had to be the basement, the roots, the heart of this nightmare. I clutched the rule sheet to my chest, though the words on it had long since become meaningless scribbles in my mind. I grabbed the railing and started down, each step sending bolts of agony through my body. My blood left a trail, a red thread leading Alara straight to me. But I had no choice. There was nowhere else to go. Halfway down, I heard her again. Lucas! Her voice slithered down the stairwell, impossibly close, impossibly many. I turned and saw her at the top of the stairs. Her body had changed even more. Her arms now dragged on the ground, long and sinewy, ending in clawed hands that scraped along the stone. Her face had split open along her cheeks, revealing rows of needle-thin teeth, each one twitching like insect legs. "Don't leave me alone," she crooned, her voice both pleading and mocking. "Stay and finish what you started." I choked on a sob and turned back, forcing my broken body to continue downward. The basement floor was a slick carpet of dark moss and roots. Vines crept up the walls, pulsating with each beat of my heart. At the center stood a massive root system, like the gnarled remains of some ancient tree, except it was breathing. Its surface shivered and flexed, weeping a black sap that pooled around its base. The air was so thick I could barely inhale. Every breath felt like drowning in tar. I stumbled forward, my foot splashing into the black sap. The stench of rotting earth and sulfur filled my nose. I fell to my knees, finally unable to support my weight any longer. The room spun, the pulsing light flickering like a failing heartbeat. I pressed my forehead to the floor, my fingers clawing uselessly at the roots. My voice cracked as I spoke to no one. "I'm sorry. I didn't know. Above me, I heard her crawling down the stairs, her claws clicking on the stone. Each sound shot electricity up my spine. She stopped at the bottom step. I felt her gaze pierce through the back of my skull. "Lucas," she whispered, her voice low and trembling. I dared to look up. Alara stood there, her face now a tapestry of writhing eyes and mouths, all whispering and laughing and weeping at once. Her hair hung in soaked black strands, merging into the vines around her. "Finish it," she breathed. "You're so close. You're almost part of us now." She began to move toward me, her feet dissolving into the roots, merging seamlessly with the mossy floor. I tried to crawl backward, but my limbs felt too heavy, as though the roots had already claimed me. The walls began to contract and expand, like lungs straining for air. The chanting voices returned, rising from every surface. Roots below, stars above, flesh to root, mind to love. My vision darkened at the edges. I felt something slide across my ankle, a vine curling around my leg, tightening like a noose. I screamed, kicking weakly, but more vines joined, climbing up my shins, wrapping my arms, slipping around my throat. Alara leaned forward, her face inches from mine. Her many mouths moved in chaotic unison. "You were chosen," she whispered, her breath sour and warm. "You were always meant to join us." I felt the roots pressing into my wounds, probing, invading. My body convulsed as the sap seeped into my veins, burning like molten lead. 1,000 images flooded my mind. My mother, lying in her hospital bed, smiling weakly as I entered. The first day of med school, my father's proud eyes. Late nights studying alone, dreaming of a life where I could save others. All of it slipped through my fingers, dissolving into the black ocean rising behind my eyes. I tried to cling to a single thought, any thought, but Alara's voice pressed in from every direction, an endless tide. You are home now. The roots yanked me forward. My face pressed into the pulsing mass at the center of the room. I felt my skin tear as something inside the root forced its way into my mouth, down my throat. I gagged, clawing at the moss, but it was useless. My body convulsed as the warmth spread through my stomach, curling up into my chest, my head. My thoughts fractured, my memories scattered like ash in a storm. Somewhere far above, I thought I heard a bird call, the echo of the outside world, a place I could no longer reach. My eyes rolled back. My fingers twitched once, then stilled. I felt my last breath leave me, slipping out in a rattling sigh that sounded almost like relief. In the final flicker of my consciousness, I saw Alara's face, or what remained of it, smiling. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice echoing in the vast black ocean, swallowing me whole. "Welcome home, Lucas." I should have been dead. That final breath, the searing warmth clawing at my veins, the feeling of my mind dissolving into black ink. It should have been the end, but I wasn't gone. I woke, or rather, I became aware somewhere else. My consciousness drifted in a thick, endless void, a heavy darkness that pressed against me from every angle. I tried to move, but there was no body to move, only a floating awareness, a raw nerve exposed to an impossible night. Then I felt it. Something slid across me. Not skin, not bone, but roots. Thin, searching tendrils gliding across my mind, peeling back memories as if turning the pages of a damp book. I felt them dig into my past, tugging at childhood scenes. My mother's voice singing softly from the kitchen. The warmth of my father's hand on my shoulder. My first anatomy textbook cracked open under the glow of a cheap desk lamp. Each memory flickered and then crumbled into ash, sinking into the blackness. Voices began to murmur around me, dozens at first, then hundreds. "You're here now. He is one of us." The roots grow stronger with every offering. I tried to scream, but there was no mouth. My thoughts felt like echoes bouncing endlessly in a dark canyon. A sudden surge of white-hot pain split me open from the inside. I felt my awareness yanked downward, like a fish hooked and dragged into the deep. Then I saw it. A vision blooming in the darkness, the house above, its walls throbbing as though breathing. Alara, standing at the foot of the grand staircase, her face smooth and doll-like again, her amber eyes glittering with a sad, satisfied calm. Her voice filtered down to me, soft and intimate. "Thank you, Lucas," she whispered. The roots needed new blood, new warmth. I tried to call out to her, to plead, to curse her, to do something, but only silence answered. The roots continued their slow, invasive dance. I felt them knitting themselves through what remained of me, weaving me into a tapestry of consciousness far larger and older than anything I could comprehend. Somewhere in the murk I sensed other presences. Flickering lights in the dark. I recognized them. A woman with a veil, the caretaker before me, a boy with hollow eyes, another offering, an old man, perhaps the first or one of the many, all of them trapped here, woven into the roots. Their thoughts flickered past me, some sobbing, some humming broken lullabies, some simply whispering nonsense over and over. I felt myself being pulled deeper, the darkness thickening around me until I could no longer distinguish myself from the roots. I was the roots. Through the web, I could feel the house above me. Every groaning beam and shifting shadow. I felt the cold wind whispering through the pines outside, the moonlight caressing the roof. I felt Alara move through the halls, her bare feet silent on the cold floors. I felt the next letter being written, the elegant script curling across thick, cream-colored paper. Seeking responsible caretaker, generous compensation, one night only. I wanted to weep. I wanted to tear at the roots that now were me, but my sorrow simply became part of the network, absorbed into the collective dread echoing through this underground labyrinth. I saw Alara standing at the library window, watching the moon. She tilted her head, her small hands folded in front of her like a child at prayer. "Lucas," she called softly, though there was no air between us. "Can you hear me?" In that moment, some tiny spark of me flared, raw and instinctive. "Yes!" I tried to scream. "I'm here, please, stop this!" Her lips twitched into a small, knowing smile. "Good," she whispered. "Stay close, we need you." I felt a sudden surge of energy rush through the roots, traveling through me like an electric current. My awareness exploded outward, bursting into every corner of the basement, then upward through the house, into the walls, the floors, the ceilings. I could see it all, every dark hallway, every warped painting, every black candle burned to stumps. I felt the heartbeat of the house, slow, deliberate, eternal. I felt a hunger gnawing at its core, a hunger that would never be satisfied. Somewhere deep in the roots, I sensed new movement, another caretaker, another victim. Someone else climbing Hollow Creek Road right now, their headlights cutting through the pines, their breath clouding in the cold air. I reached out, or whatever reaching meant in this nightmare, trying to warn them, but all I managed was a shiver in the floorboards, a soft creak they might dismiss as the house settling. I tried again, straining every fragment of my splintered self, a thin draft, a fleeting whisper. "Leave, turn back. Don't." But I knew it was useless. The house had done this for decades, maybe centuries. It knew how to silence screams. Alara turned from the window and walked deeper into the hall, her form flickering like a candle about to snuff out. In that moment, I realized I wasn't a guest anymore. I wasn't even a prisoner. I was part of the foundation, part of the hunger. I had become the echo in the walls, the whisper behind the paintings, the cold draft brushing the new caretaker's neck. And as that final spark of me dimmed, the last coherent thought I had rose like a final, hollow prayer. "Mom, I'm sorry." Then even that dissolved, replaced by the slow, rhythmic pulse of the roots. Steady, endless, hungry. Somewhere far above my buried consciousness, I felt the creak of a car door opening. A sharp rush of cold air cut across the driveway outside, carrying with it the scent of wet pine and distant snow. Tires crunched on the gravel path leading to the Aldrich house. Through the roots, I felt it all, every vibration in the soil, every shift in the heavy night air. I felt the fear blooming in the chest of the newcomer, felt their hearts stuttering as they stepped closer. They were here. I tried to see them with the ghostly scraps of my perception. A young man, maybe early 20s, pale hands trembling as he clutched a cheap canvas backpack against his chest. He wore a threadbare hoodie, the letters of some college logo barely legible under the porch light's glow. His breath fogged in the moonlight as he stared up at the towering facade of the house. From within the roots, I strained to reach him, to warn him, to scream. But all that escaped was a faint groan in the floorboards, a subtle shift he probably blamed on the cold. The front door opened slowly, as if exhaling. Mrs. Aldridge stood there, her silhouette regal and impossibly still. Her eyes gleamed like honey in the darkness, and her lips curved into that welcoming, deadly smile. "Welcome," she purred, her voice weaving through the frozen air like silk dipped in poison. "We've been expecting you, James." The boy James hesitated on the threshold. His eyes darted to the surrounding trees, then to the house again. I just came about the ad," he stammered, his voice cracking under the weight of his fear. "Yes," Mrs. Aldrich cooed, stepping aside. "Please, come in. It's so cold tonight." I felt him cross the threshold, felt the house shift, adjusting to its new guest, the walls tightening slightly as if drawing a long, greedy breath. As he stepped inside, James glanced around, his gaze snagging on the portraits lining the foyer. For a fleeting moment, our eyes met. Or as close as they could, I saw my own face in one of those portraits now. My eyes hollow and pleading, my lips forever parted as if mid-scream. James flinched, his fingers tightening around his bag. Mrs. Aldridge closed the door behind him with a soft click, sealing him inside. The sound echoed through the roots, reverberating deep in the dirt where my awareness floated like a ragged ghost. James shuffled forward, drawn toward the warm glow deeper in the house. The smell of lavender and something far more metallic drifted to meet him. "Please," Mrs. Aldridge said, gesturing elegantly. "Sit by the fire. You must be tired from your journey." He hesitated, then obeyed, sinking into one of the velvet chairs. His eyes darted nervously to the fireplace, where flames crackled and popped in an almost rhythmic chant. Through the walls, I felt Alara moving. I felt the tremor in her steps, the vibration of her claws on the polished wood floors above. She was waiting. Mrs. Aldridge handed James a thick, ivory envelope, the same one I had held once, with trembling fingers and a desperate heart. "Read these instructions carefully," she instructed, her voice sweet as poisoned honey. "If you follow them perfectly, everything will be fine." James nodded numbly, tearing open the envelope. His eyes scanned the paper, confusion and disbelief flickering across his pale face. I don't understand," he whispered, glancing up. "What is all this?" Mrs. Aldridge's smile never faltered. "Just rules to keep our daughter safe. You do want to help, don't you?" James swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. "I guess. Yes." "Good boy," she murmured, brushing a cold hand across his cheek. In the roots below, I felt myself convulse. Rage and sorrow twisted through what remained of me. I wanted to tear free, to claw up through the floors and grab him, drag him away from this nightmare. But I was nothing more than a whisper, a thin draft through the cracks. James read through the list again, his hand shaking so badly the paper rustled like dry leaves. I felt the exact moment realization began to bloom in him, that subtle spark of primal fear lighting in the back of the brain when you realize you've made a terrible, irreversible mistake. His eyes darted to the door. For a heartbeat I felt hope, but Mrs. Aldridge leaned in close, her breath cold against his ear. "You can't leave now," she whispered. "The ritual has already begun." I screamed through the roots, the sound echoing uselessly in the darkness. James stood suddenly, dropping the rule sheet. His breath came in quick, shallow gasps. He took one step toward the foyer. Alara appeared at the top of the staircase. Her hair hung in wet, matted strands across her face, her white gown stained dark at the hem. Her amber eyes burned in the low light, wide and hungry. "James," she crooned, her voice echoing like 1,000 children chanting from a well. "Don't be scared. Come upstairs. I need you." James backed away, his heel catching on the edge of the rug. He stumbled, arms flailing. Mrs. Aldridge caught him effortlessly, her thin fingers curling around his wrist with iron strength. "You'll help us, won't you?" she asked, her eyes boring into his. He whimpered, "Please, I don't want to do this." But his words dissolved into a strangled sob as Alara descended, step by step, her bare feet silent as falling ash. Through the walls I felt every vibration, every heartbeat. The house shivered with delight, the roots writhing beneath the floorboards in anticipation. I knew what was coming. I had lived it. James sank to his knees, his eyes fixed on Alara as she approached. Tears streamed down his face, mixing with the thin layer of sweat on his trembling skin. Alara crouched before him, her clawed fingers caressing his cheek, leaving faint trails of blood. "Shh," she whispered, pressing her forehead to his. "You're mine now." And deep below, in the cold cradle of the roots, I felt the final shred of my humanity slip away. I was no longer Lucas Bennett. I was the house. I was the roots. I was the hunger that would never end. and as Alara's lullaby drifted through the halls, I joined in the chorus, 1,000 voices rising as one. I once believed that death was an ending, a cold, abrupt period at the end of a sentence. But here, in the endless dark under the Eldridge house, I learned the truth. Death is a door, and some doors should never be opened. I don't know how long I drifted in the black web of roots, my mind unraveling like an old sweater, each thread slipping into an ocean of other voices. At first, I tried to hold on to myself. I repeated my name like a mantra. Lucas Bennett, Lucas Bennett, Lucas Bennett, over and over until it tasted like ash. But names are fragile things here. They dissolve faster than blood in water. Through the roots, I watched James's arrival unfold above me, each second echoing through the network like a sonar ping. I felt his terror ripple through the walls, tasted the sharp metallic edge of his panic. His heart had become part of me now, a new beat added to the thrum of the house. Above, Alara moved like a phantom in a child's costume. Her pale feet glided over the floorboards, her claws leaving hairline cracks that wept black sap. The portraits watched silently, their painted eyes glinting with wet hunger. I could almost hear them giggle whenever James trembled. Then something changed. A new surge of energy coursed through the roots, burning hotter and brighter than before. It slithered through the tendrils like wildfire, igniting pieces of me I thought had rotted away. I felt my memories return in jagged flashes, my mother's gentle fingers smoothing my hair, the way she whispered, "You're going to save lives someday," when she thought I was asleep. I remembered the hospital corridors, the stale coffee at midnight shifts, the feeling of textbooks weighing down my backpack. I remembered me. I tried to scream. The roots flexed and tightened around my consciousness, trying to crush this sudden, dangerous spark. But the surge kept growing, swelling, pounding against my ribcage like a second heartbeat. I felt Alara pause upstairs. For the first time, her steps faltered. A jolt shot through the roots, and I felt them splinter, tiny fractures spider-webbing outward from me. I realized, in that moment of electric clarity, that the roots had grown too arrogant, too bloated on centuries of swallowed souls. They had never expected resistance from within. My thoughts swirled into a storm. Images, words, scents, all crashing together in a chaotic surge. I felt my fingers again, my hands, my lungs. I wasn't whole, not truly, but something of me clawed its way out from that suffocating grave of black vines. I pushed. Upstairs, James screamed. I felt his terror like a knife in my gut. Alara shrieked in rage, her voice echoing through the entire structure like a siren wail. She twisted toward the walls, clawing at the wallpaper, her teeth gnashing at the air. "He's trying to break free!" The roots convulsed, trying to strangle the spark, but I shoved back, harder. I remembered my mother's face the day I left for med school. How her eyes had glimmered with pride even through her illness. "Promise me you'll come back," she had said, her hand trembling on mine. "I promise," I had whispered. I forced every ounce of that memory into the roots. They howled and buckled, convulsing like a dying animal. Paintings fell off the walls upstairs, glass shattering. Black sap poured from the cracks, pooling across the floors like blood. James staggered into the hallway, his face pale, his breath hitching. He stared at Alara in horror as she writhed, her bones cracking and reforming beneath her skin. "Lucas!" he gasped, as if he could somehow sense me through the chaos. "Yes, yes," I roared in the dark, a soundless scream that slammed through every inch of the house. Alara turned, her mouth splitting open in a scream so sharp it vibrated the windows. Her eyes locked on James, but beneath the fury, I saw something else. Fear. I felt the roots begin to fracture further. The walls bulged. Wooden beams groaned, and distant thunder cracked through the forest outside. I pushed again, flooding the roots with every last memory I had left. My mother's weak smile, my textbooks, the endless nights studying by flashlight, the sharp, sterile scent of the hospital. I felt something tear. The portraits on the walls warped, faces melting into black sludge. Their eyes exploded like overripe fruit, smearing across the canvas in long, wet streaks. Alara fell to her knees, claws scraping deep grooves into the floorboards. James scrambled backward, his eyes wide with horror and confusion. I felt the roots above me split open, and for the first time in what felt like centuries, a thin shaft of moonlight pierced the dark. I reached for it. My consciousness clawed upward, dragging itself inch by inch toward that pale light. The roots convulsed and shrieked, their voices fading into distant echoes. I thought of my mother again, her last words before she slipped away in that cold, sterile room. "You're stronger than you think." I pushed one last time. Above, Alara let out a final, broken cry. Her body collapsed forward, twitching violently, the amber glow in her eyes sputtering like a dying flame. James lunged forward, catching her as she fell. He screamed her name over and over, but she only shivered, her face contorting between a child's soft features and the monstrous maw I had seen too many times. The house shuddered violently. Dust rained from the ceiling. Windows cracked. A deep, resonant groan echoed through the beams like a final death rattle. The moonlight widened, flooding the hall, illuminating James as he cradled Alara's trembling form. And in that blinding, icy light, I felt something inside me break free. I was rising. The moonlight spread across the hallway like a living thing, carving sharp edges into the darkness. I clung to it with everything I had left, to the silver glow, to the taste of cold air in my mind, to the tiny shred of my humanity that still burned somewhere deep inside. Above me, James clutched Alara's limp body, rocking her like a child's broken doll. Her eyes fluttered open and shut, the one scythery amber glow fading with each flicker. "Please," he sobbed, his fingers tangled in her dark, wet hair. "Please, don't leave me, please." Alara's head lolled back, her lips parting as if to speak, but only a thin, rattling hiss escaped. Her hands twitched at her sides, claws scraping faintly against the floor. The entire house shivered, as though the walls themselves were inhaling one last ragged breath. Below, I surged upward, my essence slamming into the roots that had imprisoned me for what felt like centuries. I felt them crack and splinter around me, their ancient whispers dissolving into pain, static-filled screams. I saw flashes, images stuttering across my mind like film reels on fire. My mother's final smile, soft and resigned. The sterile hospital lights above her bed, my own hands shaking as I signed her discharge papers, promising I'd keep her safe. A surge of grief, sharp and pure, tore through me. It became a weapon, battering the last barriers that held me inside the house's rotting heart. A deep boom echoed through the foundation, shaking the chandeliers, toppling furniture. James shrieked, shielding Alara as fragments of plaster rained down. The portraits along the hall melted completely now, their frames twisted like scorched metal. Black sludge trickled from them in rivers, pooling across the floors, hissing and steaming as it touched the moonlight. Alara's head snapped forward. Her eyes snapped open wide, wide enough that the edges of her lids split, weeping dark fluid. She looked directly into James's face, her mouth stretching into that same impossibly wide grin. But this time, there was no mockery in it, only a terrible, aching sadness. "Run!" she rasped, her voice no longer 1,000-layered echoes, but the simple, brittle sound of a terrified child. James hesitated. His eyes darted to the front door, then back to her. "Go!" she pleaded, the words splintering as her chest heaved violently. "Please, run!" Suddenly her back arched so sharply I heard her spine crack. Her hands shot out, claws gouging deep furrows into the floor. A jet of black sap exploded from her mouth, splattering across James's face and shirt. He screamed, stumbling back, wiping at his eyes. Alara convulsed, her body rippling under her skin, as if something massive was pushing to escape from inside her. I reached for her through the moonlight, my consciousness crawling across the roots like a dying animal. Alara tilted her head back, eyes rolling up to the ceiling, her mouth now a yawning black pit. I felt her thoughts, disjointed and burning hot, like sparks from a wildfire. Lucas. Help. Too late. I'm sorry. So sorry. I roared in the dark, pushing every last ember of myself upward, slamming into the roots. They began to splinter like glass under a hammer. The house let out a long, agonizing moan, a sound so deep and primal it vibrated my teeth. Cracks snaked across the walls and ceiling, creeping outward like a spider web. Outside, the moon broke free from the clouds completely, flooding the foyer with a stark, sterile light. James clawed at the front door, sobbing, his fingers slipping on the brass handle slick with sap. Behind him, Alara's body split open along her spine. From the gash, a mass of twisting black tendrils erupted, writhing and snapping at the air. They struck out blindly, whipping across the walls and shattering windows. James let out one last strangled cry as he finally threw the door open, stumbling out into the night. Alara's head twisted, her mouth opening wide, and from it poured a cyclone of whispers. Voices upon voices, shrieking and weeping and laughing all at once. The roots below quaked, screaming in their ancient tongue. I pushed again, the last push. My mind felt like it was on fire. I thought of my mother, her hand on mine, her final words, "You're stronger than you think." I screamed her name. I screamed mine. The roots exploded. The force tore through the foundation like a shockwave. Alara's eyes flared one final time, bright as small suns, before shattering like glass. Above, the roof began to cave inward, raining beams and broken chandeliers. I felt the entire house buckling, the walls folding in on themselves, the rooms convulsing like a dying animal's last spasms. Through the shards of moonlight, I felt something I hadn't felt in so long. The cold air of the outside. It rushed over me, crisp and merciless. I rose with it, my consciousness clawing free from the last tatters of the roots. I felt pieces of me break away, fragments of other souls sloughing off and dissolving into the collapsing darkness. For the first time in what felt like 1,000 years, I was only me. In the ruin of the entryway, Alara's form lay motionless. Her small hand twitched once, then fell still. I hovered above, no longer a voice in the walls, no longer part of the roots, just Lucas Bennett. I felt the world tilt. I felt the sharp, painful brightness of freedom claw at me. And then, for a single, impossible heartbeat, I felt her. A small warmth. Somewhere deep under the ruin, a final echo of Alara's childlike self, separate from the monster. "Thank you," it whispered. Then silence. I drifted higher, beyond the remains of the house, beyond the broken windows and shattered portraits. The forest spread beneath me, endless and dark and whispering. The moon shone down, brilliant and indifferent, and for the first time in forever, I felt the sky. The moonlight swallowed me as I rose above the shattered bones of the Aldrich house. Below, the once grand mansion crumpled inward, groaning like a dying animal in its final breaths. The black sap that had once pulsed through the roots bubbled up through the cracks, spilling into the moonlit clearing like thick, churning tar. From this new vantage point, I saw it all. The twisted mass of roots that had spread beneath the forest for miles, now writhing in agony. The trees trembled as if they could feel the pain seeping up from the soil. I could hear them too, all the voices, the echoes of the consumed. They shrieked and whimpered, clawing at the walls of their prison as the foundations splintered around them. Somewhere in that chorus, I heard my own former whispers, the fragments of myself that had once begged for freedom. They flickered briefly, then dissolved into silence. The cold air rushed through me, sharp and clean. I had almost forgotten the simple sweetness of it, the purity. Above me, the stars glittered like shards of broken glass, scattered across an endless black lake. I drifted higher, no longer tethered to rotting wood or suffocating soil. I felt light, stripped of my failures and guilt, even if just for a moment. I wanted to stay there, to drift forever among the stars, to forget the taste of blood and sap and the thousand screaming echoes that had clawed at my mind. But below, I felt a tremor. James. He stumbled through the tree line, his breath ragged, his face pale and streaked with black ichor. His clothes hung from his frame, torn and soaked. He crashed to his knees in a clearing, sobbing. His fingers clawed at the cold earth as though he could dig himself a grave right there and disappear. "Please," he sobbed to the silent woods. "Someone help me." I hovered above, watching. A part of me, the last thread of the medic, the caretaker, ached for him. He pushed himself upright, staggering forward. The moonlight cut through the branches above, illuminating his path in shifting silver stripes. His eyes darted to the left, to the right. Every crack of a twig sent him flinching backward. A branch snapped behind him. He spun, eyes wide, breath hitching in his chest. Nothing. Or so he thought. Through the last wisps of root memory, I felt the forest shifting. Something else moved beneath the surface. Remnants of the house's hunger that had seeped into the trees, the soil, the rocks. Even without the house, the darkness was not gone. It had only changed shape. James stumbled again, falling against a moss-slicked tree. His head dropped, and a wet cough rattled from his chest. A thin trail of black ichor trickled from the corner of his mouth. I drifted closer. "James?" The word wasn't a true voice, more like a ripple in the moonlight, a thought that pressed gently against his mind. His head jerked up. His eyes scanned the clearing, wild and frantic. "Who's there?" he gasped. "Where are you?" I pressed again, softer this time. "James!" "Run!" His breath froze in his throat. His lips quivered as he forced out a whisper. "Is this?" He remembered. A wave of something like warmth, or maybe grief, rolled through me. I wanted to reach him, to grab his shaking shoulders, to push him forward through the trees, but I had no hands, no body, only this drifting echo. "Keep moving," I urged. "Don't stop. Don't look back." The forest around him shivered. Tiny cracks split across the trunks of the nearest trees, leaking thin trickles of black sap. Leaves shriveled and dropped, drifting to the ground like tiny blackened snowflakes. James scrambled to his feet, shoving himself away from the tainted trees. He turned and bolted deeper into the woods, his sobs echoing against the silent trunks. His feet slipped in the mud, branches whipped at his face, but he didn't stop. I followed above him, my essence weaving through the moonlight, urging him onward with each trembling thought. In the distance, I saw a pale line, a dirt road cutting across the forest's edge. A truck idled there, its headlights slicing into the trees like twin swords. A figure leaned against the hood, a cigarette glowing between two fingers. A trucker, maybe. A late-night hunter. Someone real. Someone alive. Hope. "James," I whispered, pressing the thought against his frantic mind. The road. Almost there. He burst through the last line of trees, mud clinging to his jeans, blood streaking his cheeks. The man by the truck straightened, the cigarette dropping from his lips. "Holy shit!" he shouted, rushing forward. "Kid? Hey, are you okay?" James collapsed into his arms, sobbing so hard he could barely breathe. The man looked past him, squinting into the dark tangle of trees. "Jesus, what the hell happened in there?" James couldn't answer. He just clutched at the man's jacket, his body racked with tremors. The trucker wrapped an arm around his shoulders, steering him toward the truck's open door. "It's okay, son," he muttered, though his voice trembled. "You're safe now. Let's get you to town." As the engine rumbled to life, I hovered above the truck, watching. I felt something loosen in me, a tension that had coiled so tight for so long I'd forgotten what it felt like to breathe without it. James was alive. He had escaped. A flicker of warmth, like a dying campfire, pulsed through me. The truck turned, its headlights sweeping across the edge of the forest. For a brief moment they illuminated the remains of the Aldridge house. Nothing but a smoldering crater, steam rising into the star-scattered sky. I drifted higher, feeling myself thinning, unraveling. The moon called to me, a pale eye in the dark. The stars whispered of vast, cold distances. I realized, finally, that I wasn't going back. There was nothing left to return to, no roots, no walls, no echoing halls, only the open sky. And in that last breath of thought before I rose beyond the trees, I whispered one final word to the fading world below me. Free. I rose higher into the night, the world shrinking beneath me like a closing eye. The forest lay sprawled below, a black sea rippling with moonlit waves. The crater where the Aldridge house had stood still glowed faintly, a wounded heart slowly ceasing its beat. I felt the last strands of my consciousness pulling free, like threads tugged from an old sweater. Every piece of me drifted upward, the memories, the echoes, the fear. For a brief, breathtaking moment, I felt whole again. I saw my mother. She stood in a hospital hallway, bathed in sterile white light. Her shoulders were thin beneath a blue robe, her hair a delicate halo of silver. But her eyes, God, her eyes. They were bright and soft, the same way they looked when she read to me as a boy. She reached out a trembling hand. "Lucas," she whispered, "you're here." Tears blurred my vision. I moved toward her, my essence vibrating with a joy so fierce it nearly broke me. But as I reached for her, I felt a sudden weight tug at my ankles, a cold, viscous grip. I looked down and saw thin black tendrils snaking up from the forest below, climbing toward me like gnarled fingers clawing at the edge of a grave. The last remnant of the roots. The house's final desperate grasp. My mother's hand hovered inches from mine, her face frozen in a soft, sad smile. I pushed upward, straining against the pull. The tendrils tightened, curling around my calves, then my thighs, slick and hungry. My mother's eyes shimmered. "You're stronger than you think," she whispered again. I roared, my voice a silent explosion in the night. Memories burst inside me, lighting up the dark. The first time I stitched a wound in med school, my hand shaking but precise. My mother's laugh echoing in our kitchen on a rainy Sunday morning. The way I'd promised her over and over that I'd never give up. I clung to those fragments like life rafts in a storm. The tendrils shrieked, their texture splitting, flaking away into ash under the force of my final push. I felt pieces of them dissolve against the moonlight, their last screams rattling in the back of my skull like a broken wind chime. I surged upward, my hand finally brushing my mother's. Her fingers curled around mine, warm, fragile, real. I felt the roots fall away completely, dropping back into the forest like dying snakes. Below, they sizzled and crumbled into the soil, leaving only thin wisps of black mist that faded in the wind. My mother's hand tightened, her eyes filled with tears that glistened like morning dew. "You did it," she whispered. "You're free." I wanted to answer, but the words tangled in my throat. Instead, I pressed my forehead to hers, feeling her warmth, the softness of her breath against my cheek. In that instant, everything else, the house, the roots, Alara's screams, dissolved. There was no darkness, no hunger, no echoing hallways, just us. A bright light bloomed around us, swelling and crackling like a star being born. I felt my form fragmenting, but this time it didn't hurt. Each piece floated upward, shimmering like fireflies on a summer night. I wasn't dying, I was becoming. Becoming what? I didn't know, and for once, I didn't need to. I looked into her eyes one last time, and she nodded, her smile trembling but radiant. Then she let go. I drifted backward, my form unraveling into countless shimmering motes. My mother's shape began to fade too, blending into the swirling light. But even as we parted, I felt her with me, in me, her love stitched into every last atom of what I had become. Below, the forest finally stilled. James's truck sped away down the winding road, its red taillights glowing like fireflies in the darkness. He would survive. He would carry the scars, but he was free. I watched him disappear into the distance, my heart swelling with a quiet, fierce pride. I turned my gaze upward, beyond the moon, beyond the stars. A vast, endless sea of darkness stretched above me, scattered with rivers of silver and violet. I felt a pull, gentle and ancient, calling me home, wherever that might be. I let it take me, my form scattering further into the cosmic wind. I felt every star brush against me like a hand on my cheek. And somewhere in that infinite sky, I heard the faintest echo of Alara's childlike giggle, softer this time, no longer twisted by hunger or pain. Final goodbye. I drifted on, past nebulae that shimmered like stained glass, past galaxies that spiraled in quiet, patient dances. Every fragment of me hummed with the memory of Earth, of the forest, of moonlight on trembling leaves, of whispered promises in hospital rooms. I realized that in the end, it wasn't about escaping the house, or even the roots. It was about breaking the cycle, about freeing James, about freeing Alara, even in her final, tragic form, about freeing myself. As I passed beyond the last wisp of atmosphere, my thoughts finally grew quiet. No more fear, no more hunger, no more echoes in the walls. Only light, only the soft hush of the stars. And in that hush, I finally whispered the words I had longed to say for so many years, my final echo to the universe. Mom, I'm coming home. Beyond the veil of stars, I drifted. The universe sprawled around me, a vast tapestry stitched with brilliant threads of light and pools of infinite dark. I felt no weight, no blood pounding in my head, no jagged edges of panic. Instead, there was a steady, resonant hum, like the low, comforting thrum of a mother's lullaby, heard through the walls as a child drifts to sleep. In this place, I could see everything and nothing at once. I saw the forest below, each tree now still and silent, their roots curling like resting animals, and the roots curling like resting animals. The soil had stopped weeping black sap. The air shimmered with a cautious peace. I saw James's truck bumping down the winding road, headlights cutting a path through the mist. He gripped the steering wheel with white-knuckled desperation, his eyes wild and hollow, yet burning with a single stubborn spark. Survival. Further still, I saw the small town, at the edge of the pines. Streetlights glowed like watchful sentinels, houses hunched together in the moonlight, unaware of the nightmare that had almost spilled into their quiet streets. A stray dog trotted across an empty lot, pausing to sniff the wind. A lone figure in a hoodie shuffled home from a graveyard shift at the diner, oblivious to the old horror that had just died in the woods. I turned my gaze inward, into the deeper layers of this new expanse. And there, waiting in the shimmering dark, stood echoes of all the lost souls that had been taken by the house. They weren't whole, more like flickers of candle flames on the edge of a storm. But in this place they shone softly, each one humming with relief, some small fragment of them finally released. I moved through them, feeling the warmth of each presence, the woman with the black veil, the boy with the hollow eyes, the old man with his crooked smile. Their fear was gone now, no more echoing whispers clawing for escape. I felt Alara too. She hovered at the center of them all, small and fragile, her hair no longer slick with sap, but flowing like soft midnight silk. Her amber eyes no longer burned with hunger. Now they glowed with something like wonder. When she looked at me, she tilted her head slightly, just as she had done countless times in that house. But here the gesture was gentle, shy. "Lucas," she whispered, her voice carrying through the cosmic dark like a ripple across still water. I drifted closer. "I'm sorry," she said, her eyes wet with starlight. "I didn't want it to end like that." I reached for her, not with hands, but with the gentle, pulsing light that had become my new self. She stepped forward, pressing her forehead against mine, and in that silent touch a wave of sorrow and love and final understanding passed between us. I saw her earliest memories, fleeting images of a mother's soft hands, a nursery filled with morning light, laughter echoing in distant hallways before it all turned to rot. I felt her terror when the roots first took hold, twisting her into a vessel for the house's endless hunger. And I saw her small, hidden hope that someone, someday, might free her. "I forgive you," I whispered, though my voice was now a pulse of light. She trembled against me, her glow shivering. Then she smiled, wide and unbroken for the first time in her existence. She stepped back, her outline flickering and softening. One last glance, grateful, bittersweet, before she dissolved into 1,000 gleaming motes that rose into the star-strewn sky. One by one, the other souls followed, drifting upward in slow spirals, merging into the vast night like fireflies rising from a summer field. I watched them ascend until the last spark vanished into the tapestry of stars. A long silence settled. I turned my attention back to Earth, to James. He sat in a diner booth now, head bowed over a chipped mug of black coffee. His fingers trembled against the ceramic. The waitress watched him warily from the counter, unsure whether to approach. He was trying to make sense of it, piecing together the fragments of that nightmare. He would carry it for the rest of his life, in the tremor of his hands, in the way he flinched at creaking floorboards or a distant whisper in the night, but he would live. Somewhere beyond the diner in a small cemetery on the edge of town, I felt a familiar tug. My mother's gravestone stood beneath a crooked oak, the inscription faded by rain and time. "You are stronger than you think." I felt the shape of her voice, the way it had wrapped around me when I was small, the way it had anchored me even in my last moments in that house. A warmth flooded through me, stronger than any pain, deeper than any darkness. I drifted toward the stars again, higher and higher, until the town, the forest, and the scars of that nightmare shrank into a single silent dot. I felt my form unraveling fully now, each last memory and echo blending into the cosmic winds. There was no more fear, no more need to fight or flee, only the vast, boundless quiet of eternity. And in that final moment, as the last piece of me slipped into the starlight, I felt my mother's hand in mine. I realized then, I wasn't leaving. I was returning. My final thought stretched across the endless dark, a soft echo slipping through the stars like a whispered prayer. I'm home. Somewhere far beyond the forest, beyond the shattered shell of the Aldrich house, beyond even the soft edges of memory, I floated in the great dark. The stars shimmered around me like a million watchful eyes, each one a silent witness to all the tragedies and triumphs I had lived. I felt no weight now, no burden of flesh or bone. Yet even here, in this formless sea of starlight, the echoes of who I was pulsed softly, like embers refusing to die out. Lucas Bennett. Son, student, caregiver, survivor. I drifted through currents of cosmic wind, each gust carrying whispers from distant worlds, strange melodic languages I could almost understand. Below, Earth spun quietly in its cradle of mist and moonlight. From this height, it looked serene, untouched by the crawling blackness that had once nested in that rotted house. I watched cities blink like constellations, cars slicing ribbons of light down midnight highways, ships drifting across ocean ink. So many lives, so many hearts beating in the dark. I felt James there, in one small dot of light. He lay in a motel bed now, shaking beneath a thin blanket. His face was pale, eyes wide and haunted, locked on a stained ceiling he couldn't quite see. In his mind he replayed the hallway, Alara's glowing eyes, her voice begging, the roots tearing through the walls. His breath came in sharp, ragged gasps, but even through the terror, a tiny spark glimmered. A promise he didn't yet realize he'd made to himself. Never go back. Never be claimed again. I pressed closer, wrapping my essence around him in a thin protective veil, not a physical touch, but something deeper. A warm breeze drifting across a fevered brow, a phantom hand resting on a trembling shoulder. Rest, I whispered, though no sound crossed my lips. You made it out. You're stronger than you know. For a moment, his breathing slowed. His eyelids fluttered shut. Sleep, shallow, broken, but real, began to claim him. I felt that same warmth echo outward, rippling across space and memory. I thought of my mother again, her laughter in the kitchen, the soft cadence of her words as she read stories on stormy nights, the hush of hospital monitors when I sat beside her, holding her fragile hand as if it might drift away. Her final words had carried me farther than any medicine, any prayer, any scream. "You're stronger than you think." I repeated it like a mantra now, each echo brighter than the last, each syllable carving deeper into the infinite dark around me. Somewhere beyond the stars I felt her presence, waiting like a distant lighthouse, a beacon calling me home, not to a place, but to a feeling, the deepest warmth of belonging. I drifted toward it, letting the last tatters of earthly fear slough away. The black tendrils that had clung to me dissolved completely, leaving behind only that soft shimmer of who I really was. Below, I sensed the forest begin to heal. New saplings pressed up through the ashen soil, the air shifted, carrying the scent of pine and rain instead of rot and sulfur. Animals crept cautiously back through the underbrush, their paws leaving gentle prints in the damp earth. An owl hooted softly from a high branch, as though announcing the end of a long, terrible vigil. The roots were gone. The hunger had ended. I looked back one final time, my awareness sweeping across every dark corner I had ever inhabited, every echo, every broken hallway, every portrait's haunted eyes. All of it had been burned away in that final moonlit surge. Alara's final whisper drifted past me once more, a fleeting starlit echo. "Thank you." I sent her my own silent reply, "Be free." I rose higher still, the veil between what had been and what could be thinned around me, shimmering like heat above a desert road. I saw the edge of something vast and unknowable, a sea of light so blindingly bright it felt like stepping into a sunrise after a lifetime underground. My thoughts began to stretch and unravel, each memory blooming into new shapes before dissolving into the glow. I felt no fear, only the deep, swelling comfort of finally returning to a place I had always longed for, even if I had never known its name. I thought of James one last time. I saw him years from now, older, lined with quiet grief but stronger. His eyes carried shadows but also a stubborn, steady light, a scar on his forearm, a reminder of the night he almost didn't escape. One day, I saw him telling someone else, a child, maybe his own, a story. Not the story of the Aldrich house, but a different one, about survival, about believing in impossible escapes, about never letting the darkness decide who you become. That image felt like a final gift, a promise that my pain had not been in vain, a promise that my mother's last wish for me to heal, to help, to protect had not been lost to the roots. I turned toward the sea of light, feeling my form grow translucent, my edges blurring like mist in a morning breeze. I was no longer Lucas Bennett. I was no longer the caretaker. I was no longer the echo clawing through the walls. I was every heartbeat I had ever loved. I was every whisper of comfort I had ever given. I was the shimmer of starlight on an empty road at 3 a.m., the hush before a sunrise, the sigh of a mother's final embrace. And as I slipped beyond the last veil, I heard 1,000 voices, all the ones I had once feared, all the ones I had once loved, joined together in a single, gentle chorus. They sang not of endings, but of endless beginnings, of freedom, of return, of light. My final thought, as I disappeared into the glow, was not a word at all, but a feeling. Home. Long after I slipped into the light, long after my last echo merged with the cosmic sea, Earth kept spinning. Seasons crawled past, as relentless and beautiful as they had always been. The forest that once shivered under the Aldrich house's shadow began to heal in earnest. Spring brought soft green buds that clung to blackened stumps like small, brave prayers. Birds returned, weaving nests from moss and twigs, their songs tentative at first, then bright and bursting with defiance. The crater left by the collapsing house filled slowly with rainwater, forming a small, mirror-smooth pond that reflected the sky so clearly it looked like a piece of another world had fallen to earth. People in town whispered about the place for years afterward. Some said the house burned down in a lightning storm, though no one remembered seeing a fire. Others claimed they heard strange noises in the woods, screams that rose and fell like distant sirens. A few insisted they saw a young man, pale, wild-eyed, stumbling from the tree line the night it happened, his clothes soaked in black ichor, his mouth open in a silent scream. They never mentioned James by name, though. The town preferred their legends vague and shifting, easier to fold into bedtime ghost stories than to confront as truth. James left town soon after. He kept to himself for years, moving from one small city to another, always near forests, but never in them. The woods haunted him. Every rustling branch or snapping twig twisted his stomach into knots. He avoided mirrors, avoided deep water, avoided the smell of damp earth after rain. But slowly, in tiny, almost imperceptible ways, he began to heal. He found a small apartment above a bookstore. He got a job stocking shelves at night, enjoying the quiet, the hush of pages turning in the dark. Sometimes he would pause to read passages from the books he handled, lines about survival, about redemption, about broken men stitching themselves back together, and each time he felt a tiny flicker inside him, a warmth. Years passed. James aged, his hair peppered with gray, his hands steady once more. One autumn night, while closing the shop, he found a young woman sitting cross-legged between two bookshelves, tears streaming down her cheek. She flinched when she saw him. "I'm sorry," she stammered. I just needed a quiet place. I didn't mean to scare you." James looked at her, really looked, and saw a reflection of his own past terror flickering in her eyes. He nodded, sinking to the floor beside her. "It's okay," he said softly. "Sometimes you need to run away to find where you really belong." They sat together in silence for a long time, the only sound the soft tick of the old wall clock and the rustle of wind against the glass. Eventually she wiped her tears and he helped her to her feet. That moment changed them both. James started speaking at small support groups, first as a silent tattoo, then as a reluctant speaker. Eventually, he became a quiet mentor for those who carried invisible wounds. He never told the true story, the house, the roots, Alara, but he shared the feeling of clawing out from a darkness so deep it threatened to consume your name. People listened. Some wept. Others clung to his words like lifelines. Late at night after meetings, James would return to his small apartment, pour himself a cup of tea, and sit by the window overlooking the narrow alley below. He'd tilt his head back, gaze at the stars, and remember. Sometimes he'd feel a ripple across his mind, a warmth, almost like a presence brushing past him in the night air. Lucas. A hush would settle over the room, so soft it felt like a heartbeat in the dark. James would smile, his eyes shining. "I know you're out there," he'd whisper. "Thank you." Meanwhile, deep in the forest where it all began, the pond shimmered under moonlight, smooth as glass. Animals came to drink at its edges, unaware of the terrible things that once festered below. Fireflies drifted above it in slow spirals, their glow painting fleeting constellations on the water's surface. One winter night, a boy and his father hiked into the woods, following a trail no longer marked on any map. The father stopped at the pond's edge, taking off his worn backpack and dropping it beside a rock. The boy squatted, poking at the thin layer of ice along the edges. "Why did we come all the way out here, Dad?" he asked. The father stared at the moon's reflection, his breath a white ghost in the cold air. "Sometimes," he said, his voice low and reverent, "we come to remember. Even places that hurt us can teach us something important." The boy looked up at him, confused but curious. "Like what?" The father kneeled, resting a hand on the boy's small shoulder. "That even the darkest roots can't hold you forever," he said. "There's always a way back to the light." The boy tilted his head, then nodded slowly. They sat together for a while, the forest around them silent except for the soft groan of shifting ice. Eventually, they stood and turned back toward the trail, the father glancing over his shoulder one last time before disappearing among the pines. Above them, stars wheeled in quiet, patient arcs, indifferent yet beautiful. Among them, somewhere far beyond, I watched. I felt the warmth of the forest below, the gentle pulse of James's quiet life, the father's soft words echoing in his son's heart. And in that endless dark I drifted, not lost, not broken. A guardian, a whisper, a final echo of light, In my last flicker of awareness before merging fully with the cosmos, I felt a single small thought bloom inside me. This is how we survive, by leaving warmth behind for others to find. And then, finally, I dissolved into the stars. Somewhere beyond Orion's belt, beyond the cold swirl of distant galaxies, I felt my last pieces drifting apart. Scattering like dandelion seeds on an endless cosmic wind, I had become a whisper in the void, a thin, shimmering ribbon of memory floating through the silent dark. Yet even as I slipped into the starry sea, some small part of me looked back to the forest where it all began, back to Earth, that fragile blue marble clinging to its thin veil of air and light. I saw James again. He stood on a small stage in a dusty community center, facing a circle of folding chairs. He looked older now, lines etched around his mouth and eyes, his shoulders a little more stooped. The circle was filled with people. Their faces were lined with exhaustion and quiet desperation. Eyes turned to James as though he might hold some hidden key to survival. He took a deep breath, his hand trembling slightly on the microphone. "My name is James," he began, his voice low and raspy, "and I survived something that almost took everything from me." The room held its breath. James closed his eyes, searching for words. "When I was young," he continued, "I believed monsters were just stories parents told us to keep us from wandering too far at night. But I learned the hard way that some monsters don't live under the bed or in the closet. Some monsters are places. Some monsters are ideas that worm into your mind and make you question whether you're worth saving at all." A woman in the circle sobbed softly, her shoulders shaking. A man next to her reached over and took her hand. James nodded slowly, as though affirming something to himself. "I carried that darkness with me for years. I thought I'd never outrun it. I thought it had already decided who I was, what my story would be." He paused, taking another breath that rattled in his chest. "But I realized something," he said, his voice trembling but clear. "We don't have to be defined by the things that break us. We can choose to be more than the echoes of our worst nights. We can choose to survive, to move forward, even if we have to drag ourselves." In the back of the room, a young man lifted his head. His eyes were red, his hands clenched into tight fists on his knees. James saw him, and for a moment their eyes locked. A quiet understanding passed between them, a silent promise that no one had to be alone in the dark. I felt that promise ripple outward, through the building's walls, into the parking lot where the wind rattled dry leaves against cracked asphalt, into the night sky above where a pale sliver of moon watched patiently, and beyond to me. I drifted lower, closer, folding through the thin layers of atmosphere like mist slipping between branches. I moved through cities buzzing with neon lights, past highways pulsing with headlights, over rooftops where children pressed their faces to the glass, dreaming of other worlds. In each of them, I felt tiny sparks. Fear, yes, but also wonder, resilience, defiance. In a small town nestled against a lake, I saw a young girl sitting on her bedroom floor, surrounded by paper cranes she had folded herself. Her mother's voice filtered up the hallway, humming a gentle tune. The girl looked out the window at the moon, her lips moving in a silent wish she didn't yet know how to say aloud. I brushed past her softly, a breeze that ruffled her hair and made her shiver with sudden warmth. In another town, a man stood alone on a bridge, gripping the cold metal railing. His eyes were dark and empty, tears leaving bright trails down his cheeks. I drifted across his shoulder like a phantom hand. In his mind, I left a single word, bright as a candle: stay. His breath caught. He looked down at the water below, then slowly, achingly, stepped back from the edge. I moved on, slipping through the world like moonlight on still water. Wherever there was a shadow deep enough to swallow a soul, I left a sliver of light. Wherever there was a scream no one else could hear, I left an echo of my own. Through it all, I felt the pulse of my mother's final words, her faith braided through every atom of me. "You're stronger than you think." That phrase became more than memory. It became a melody that hummed through every star I passed, every dark alley I drifted across, every lonely heart I brushed against. At the edge of a quiet field, I paused. A young woman sat under an old oak, her journal open across her lap. She scribbled furiously, her tears staining the ink. I hovered above her, reading the words spilling from her pen. I don't know if I can keep going. I don't know who I am anymore. I pressed close, wrapping my light around her shoulders like an old quilt. She froze. Then she looked up at the sky, her eyes glimmering in the moonlight. I don't know why, she whispered to the stars, but I feel like someone's here, like I'm not alone. A single firefly rose from the grass beside her, blinking once, twice, then drifting upward, lighting a path through the dark. She watched it go, her hand slowly uncurling from the tight fist around her pen. I followed the firefly higher, my form beginning to stretch and thin again. I knew, finally, that I could let go completely. But even as I dissolved into the cosmic stream, I understood something deeper than words. I had become the whisper, the hush in the dark that reminds you to breathe, the flicker in the corner of your eye that makes you pause and remember that you matter. I distressed in the dark that reminds you to breathe, the flicker in the corner of your eye that makes you pause and remember that you matter. And in my final, fading thought, I felt a chorus of voices, not just mine. Not just the souls I had freed, but every survivor who ever clawed their way out of the dark. Together, we spoke one last time, across every star and every lonely window. You are not alone. Then, finally, I became the light. Thank you. Truly, thank you for staying with me until the very end of this journey. This story wasn't just about haunted houses or twisted roots. It was about survival, about grief, forgiveness, and the echoes we leave behind when we're gone. In the darkest moments, whether in the woods at midnight or inside our own minds at 3 a.m., it can feel like we're alone, like no one could possibly understand the weight we're carrying. But the truth is, we're never really alone. Even in the deepest shadows, there are whispers of hope, tiny sparks waiting to remind us that no matter how lost we feel, there is always a path back to the light. To anyone listening who's ever felt trapped, broken, or beyond saving, you are stronger than you think. Your story isn't finished yet. I poured my heart into this story, and I hope it left a mark on you, the way it left a mark on me. If it did, if it made you feel something, if it made you pause and look at the night sky a little differently, please consider liking the video, subscribing, and sharing it with someone who might need to hear it. Your support helps me keep creating these long, immersive stories for you all. Stories that remind us that even in horror, there is beauty, humanity, and the quiet possibility of redemption. From the deepest part of my heart, thank you for listening, for feeling, for being here. Until the next story, keep your eyes on the stars, keep your roots strong, and remember, you are not alone.